All right, we're going to get started at 7 o'clock, January 21st, 2025. This is a meeting of the School District 194 Lakeville School Board. We will start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Stand.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, we're going to start with the roll call, starting from my right, if you would.
Amber Cameron, Director.
Brett Nicholson.
Matt Swanson, Chair.
Michael Bauman, Superintendent.
Kim Baker.
Carly Anderson.
Brian Thompson.
All right, we also have Kim Elson present, and Emily McDonald, and a number of her staff members who I think we'll be introducing a little bit later. On agenda additions, I do have one motion to make as an addition to the agenda. And due to the circumstances of our cancellation of school today, which has caused some issues, there's been a request that we extend the current semester through Monday to allow for test taking for the students in grades 9 through 12. So to accomplish that, I would move to add to the agenda a vote to adjust the school calendar by one day for grades 9 through 12 due to the unexpected weather closure. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
All right, Director Carbone seconds that motion. All in favor of amending the agenda to add this issue, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. All right, there be none. The motion has passed and it's added to the agenda. Let's just vote to get that out of the way right now so we don't forget. So I will move to approve the adjustment to the school calendar extending the first semester for grades 9 through 12 one extra day. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Once again, Paul Carbone seconds it. Any discussion? Brian Thompson?
Can we provide clarity? When you say one extra day, we're not adding another day throughout the calendar school year. It is leveraging an existing day. So just saying Monday, we're going to have the semester end on Monday instead of on Wednesday, correct?
That is my understanding.
I just want to say I really appreciate that we're doing this. I have a sophomore who's been really nervous about trying to get those tests done in one day, and I can't imagine teachers trying to adjust the test to fit the time frame. So
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Director Thompson. Just for clarity for our public, our finals for our high school students were scheduled to be today and tomorrow. And then Thursday, they have a grading day to grade all of those finals and prepare for the grades for the high school students. And then we have a professional development day to set up for the new semester, which was supposed to start on Monday. As a result, the initial plan proposed by the principals was to move all of those finals, the finals from today, into tomorrow, which would result in students having up to 6 finals in one day. After some dialogue early this morning, we determined that in the best interest of students, we would advocate to move the finals to tomorrow as planned, and then Monday, which would extend our current semester by one day and have our second semester start on Tuesday of next week in lieu of Monday. So just so that people are clear on the rationale around that. Thank you.
Does that, in terms of the tests that are happening on Monday, how does that impact teachers differently who are grade? I guess I'm wondering about there was supposed to be a grading day for everybody on Thursday, right? Does that?
Yeah, the impact there is that the grading day is technically prior to, so they'll have half their finals and then their grading day. For a number of reasons, it was untenable to move that grading day. And so as a result, what we've done is we've extended the deadline to have grades submitted to provide a little bit more time for teachers. So it really, as we went through the possible solutions and brainstormed, there really wasn't an ideal solution, but we wanted to come up with what we thought would be the best one for everyone in the system. And we did have the teachers and administrators advocating to make that move, even though the grading day is ahead. So not ideal, but I think a better situation than when we were in yesterday. And, you know, with Minnesota weather, you have to be a little flexible. So thank you for the question.
Yeah. Any other comments or questions? I really appreciate the work that was done to come up with this solution to an unexpected problem. So with that being said, I believe there's a second. If there is no more discussion, we'll close it and move to a vote. So all those in favor of approving the adjustment to the school calendar, extending the first semester for grades 9 through 12 by 1 extra day, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. None opposed, it is approved. That brings us down to our superintendent's report. Superintendent Bauman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Got just a couple items. One of them we just talked about, and just for everybody's knowledge, communications have been out to that effect. So I believe those affected by this have received communication. So we did that earlier today. We did adjust and allow for activities to occur this afternoon starting at 2 p.m. Temperature was almost around 8 degrees, so we figured it was balmy enough to roll forward with that. But just so everybody knows, the school closure, that's not ever taken lightly. That's a very difficult decision, especially when you're talking about weather. But all the indicators were that we'd be 35 to 40 below with a wind chill. And so I made that call, so if anybody's upset, I'll take it. But I also want you to know that we think about the safety of our kids, and we have a lot of young ones out there as well. So I felt that was an appropriate call. We across the South Metro, I know a lot of other districts closed as well. So that's my report, Mr. Chair, pending any questions.
Thank you. Now, I can tell you my kids were thrilled to hear the news last night. I was tempted not to tell them, and just so I could say, well, you better get to bed because you have school in the morning, but we did tell them. So, yeah, appreciate the work once again. So next, we're just going to roll right into the main reason why we're here tonight is the academic report, and to hear from Emily McDonald and her staff.
Good evening, Chair Swanson, members of the board, Superintendent Bauman. Thanks so much for having us tonight. We are thrilled to be here to share a bit of an update and academic report this evening. As I get started, thank you, Nicole. Nicole has handed out to you a folder that contains some of the graphics that you'll see in our presentation. They're all on the presentation, but just so you can have them up close and personal, sometimes they get small. And then we've also provided to you a glossary of terms. As you may know, we are well known for our use of acronyms, only secondary to the military, I think, right, Michael? And sometimes it's hard to track because we use these so frequently that we forget to take a pause and make sure that our general public understands what it is that we're talking about. So we have provided that to you as well, along with an alignment for the slide that it will be mentioned on this evening. We'll continue to add to this list as we go, but thought this was a good start to help, help you to all understand what it is that we're talking about in our presentation tonight. I do want to, you can go ahead and put the slideshow. Do I just click? Oh, there we go. So I do have with me tonight 3 members of our team. I have Nicole Adams, who is our Director of Integrated Continuous Improvement. I have Sandy Georgie, our Director of Elementary Teaching and Learning, and Elida Kane, our Director of Secondary Teaching and Learning. Our plan tonight is we have set up our presentation to have, we each sort of are taking a part, and so we'll just be sort of coming up and sitting down as each part comes, just so you know how we're going to run our presentation this evening. I do want to start by saying, as you all know, when you're talking about a teaching and learning in an organization of our size or of any size, there's a lot to know. And so our goal for this evening is to really give you a 30,000-foot view of some of our processes and the things that we focus on in our department. This is not going to be comprehensive of everything we do tonight, but as teachers, we like to set it up where we do some instruction around the big picture, and then we see what types of questions might arise, give you some time to think about it, and then come back at another time and do some follow-ups. So we've talked about that as well. So this won't be our only presentation, but it'll give us a start to some conversations and maybe see what kind of questions you have for the future as we move on. So I want to just start with our strategic plan. Michael made mention of this, I think, in our last couple of meetings. We really embed everything we do, align everything we do to our strategic plan. And so when you look at our mission and our values and our goals and our vision, these are the things that we are striving for, and these are the places we go to make sure that when we're setting up processes and procedures and assessments, et cetera, that we are aligned to this document. So it really is at the core of what we're doing in all aspects of our district. We're going to talk about a number of items this evening. I mentioned district alignment a little bit already. We're going to talk about MTSS and our continuous improvement cycle. Nicole will address that. We're going to move a little bit into assessment and what those processes look like. And Sandy Georgie will, be speaking to those. And then Elida will finish with our standards-based review process. So what does it look like? How do we look at curriculum, adopt curriculum? What kind of processes do we go through? Teacher evaluation, and then I will wrap it up with some systems challenges and to talk about what could potentially be next in a future presentation. So again, being grounded, if you go back to our mission, one of the things that we want to do is we always want to make sure that we are doing everything we can to ensure that our students are as successful as they can be and that they are best prepared for whatever their future will bring. For us, what students choose to do after high school is very personal, and we want to support them in all of that. But our goal is always to make sure that regardless, that choice is theirs. There's not barriers holding them back from making a decision to go into a career or to go to a 4-year college or a 2-year college or the military, et cetera. So we want them to be prepared to be able to make choices about what their future looks like for them. This is our profile of a graduate. This really directly aligns to our mission. When we think about our graduates, these are sort of the attributes that we want to see when they leave our system and the things that we are committed to driving towards as we move forward. So when we talk about our how, I talked a little bit about our strategic roadmap as well. That's a core document for us. Our second core document is our Lakeville framework. Nicole will speak more directly to this framework, but essentially it's our continuous improvement framework. And as a system and an organization, these are the areas that we are focusing on and working on to improve our system for the betterment of student outcomes. And then finally, based off of our strategic mission, strategic roadmap, our framework, we have both district and operational plans which annually guide our work in terms of what are our focus areas, where are our areas of improvement, et cetera. So Nicole will take us a deep dive into the how and the what in our district, and so I will pass it off to her.
Thanks, Dr. McDonald. I'm really excited to be able to talk to you a little bit about our continuous improvement framework. You may have heard Dr. McDonald mention the term MNMTSS. That's one of those acronyms, stands for Minnesota Multi-Tiered Systems of Support. I feel like that doesn't really explain what it is, and in its most fundamental level, it is a continuous improvement framework. This is the third year that Lakeville has worked through MNMTSS as an organizational continuous improvement plan. A lot of the work that has been done thus far has been a lot of systems readiness. And what you will see in moving forward in years to come is that there are many, many initiatives that the district has taken on, but all of these really fit into a single framework that really helps align our focus and really hone in on goals that we would like to see accomplished. A lot of times large organizations run into becoming siloed, and our goal is to make sure that we are operating with focus and alignment, and making sure that everything is moving in the same direction. So what you see on this slide are just a few of the initiatives that have taken place over the years and are continuing to be in place. They all can be very easily aligned to our Lakeville framework. Actually, I'm just going to go back here quickly. This image of the Lakeville framework in that middle slide, this is actually, there are 5 key components to the Lakeville framework. There are 5 key components for MNMTSS. And so you are going to see that every component of the work we do aligns to one of these areas. And I'll get into a little more depth on those areas. So every year, we engage in a self-evaluation of MNMTSS, or the semi. This is a very comprehensive self-evaluation tool that is done at both the district level and the site levels. It requires us to gather data and to make determinations about how we are doing in all 5 components of the Lakeville framework, or MNMTSS. And as you can see on the screen, those 5 components are infrastructure and continuous improvement, purposeful student, family, and community engagement, intentional instructional practices and supports, multiple ways to demonstrate learning, and data-informed decisions. Every aspect of our organization shows up in this semi in some way, shape, or form. Just to give you an idea of the measurement, a score on a particular area or a particular component between 1.61 and 2.0 means vision. In other words, we're doing amazing. Anything between 1.21 and 1.60 means we're making good progress. A score of 0.81 to 1.20 is the minimal acceptable level for us as an organization. 0.41 to 0.80 is an area of high concern. And 0 to 0.4 is an area of intervention. Using this tool at both the site level and the district level helps us determine our areas of priority. And as you can see on the screen, our 2 areas of highest priority, as determined by last year's semi, was purposeful student family engagement and intentional instructional practices and supports. And so what we are here talking about tonight is intentional instructional practices and supports. That is one of our highest areas of priority as a district. This is just, wrong screen. This is just another overview of how the district semi works. The district leadership team takes the semi. We use that to prioritize areas for improvement that are identified for our district continuous improvement planning. So this is how we know where and how to allocate resources. An operational plan, a district operational plan, is created or updated. In this case, we do have one, and it will continuously be updated to reflect these district priorities. From there, we work with all sites for them to develop they take their semi. So they take a very similar semi. They have to collect data and use that data as evidence to give themselves scores. And then they also set areas of priority for improvement based on the results of their semi and the district semi. So the idea is there's a district level operational plan, and every site has an operational plan that is similarly aligned. This year was the first year that all sites have completed the semi and developed a site operational plan using this methodology. The exception of that, of course, is Highview. They will take their first one this spring. Some sites were a little bit further along in the process, and they completed it for their second time this year. We continually use those site operational plans and district operational plans to direct our work throughout the year. So we're going to talk a little bit about intentional instructional practices and supports. As noted, this was an area of high concern for us as a district, and specifically, the semi really breaks out our tiered instruction. Tier 1 instruction is where we have rated ourselves as the lowest, meaning this is where we really want to spend a lot of time and attention. Tier 1 instruction means universal instruction. It is what every student gets. Tier 2 is supplemental. Students might need a little bit of help for a little bit of time in a particular area. And Tier 3 is intensive intervention. They need more help for perhaps a longer period of time, more focused. So we are really focusing on that Tier 1 instructional, those Tier 1 instructional practices. Just another mental map, another way of looking at this is when we're looking at a continuous improvement model for an educational system. At the bottom, we have all of those components are at the foundation. The infrastructure and continuous improvement, purposeful student and family engagement, data-informed decisions in multiple ways to demonstrate learning. That is the foundation upon which tiered instruction is developed. We continuously monitor the operational plans. On the left, you see this is just a screenshot of our district operational plan. And on the right is a template of what a school operational plan would look like. And again, as I mentioned, we have identified those 2 district priorities based on data for the 24-25 school year, instructional models and methods or intentional instructional supports, and that family and student involvement strategy. A lot of the work that we have done this year has really focused on clearly defining universal Tier 1 instructional evidence-based strategies that we expect to see across the district implemented continuously. And you're going to hear a little bit more about how we use assessment in our standards-based review process to really focus on that work.
Can we,
Yeah.
Nicole, may I ask a
Yes,
question?
Of course.
Instructional practices and support, one of your most important, as you say. I'm assuming that translates into academic outcomes.
Yes.
What are you using to measure success there? What type of metrics are you using to
Sandy,
determine?
Yep, that's going to get into our assessment portion. As I'm just going to go back to the framework. I know this is difficult to see, but that lower right-hand hot pink color there, that's data-driven decision-making. We use assessments, a variety of assessment tools, including criterion-referenced measures to help us determine how are our students doing, how is our district doing in instructing those students. And again, that will be a little more depth in just a few moments here.
Okay.
Director Thompson?
The part of the semi, can you share with me who actually does who actually conducts it? Do we have a third party objector that says, hey, I think you're not doing this well or doing this well based on who are, or is it this team that does that at the individual locations?
Yeah, that would be mostly my department. The semi actually comes out of MDE, and a lot of their research comes from the Implementation Science Resource Center. And so it is, I have copies of it if you ever wanted to look at it. That is part of the process of continuous improvement, is building organizational capacity to be able to answer those questions using empirical evidence to make sure that the perception matches the reality.
Can Can I just add one thing? Thank you for the question. When we do our district semi, we really have a cross-functional team that actually takes the assessment. So we do this all internally. So everything you're seeing, all of the dials, all of the forms, all of the charts, we have all created.
There you go.
It's on.
Yeah.
Just repeat everything you just said. No, I'm kidding.
No problem. So I do want to start by saying to your first question, Director Thompson, everything that we do internally. So we don't pay anybody to come in at this point to conduct any or create anything or monitor anything or develop the tools. We've developed all of those internally. At the district level, when we're talking about the semi-assessment, that's really done with a cross-functional team of different stakeholders across the system internally. And so we have a district group that does that. At the building, every building, as you know, has a shared leadership team. And so it's the responsibility of the administrator or administrators, depending on the building, and then the cross-functional staff team to come together to then take that at the building level.
Director Thompson.
So when does the does the community get involved? Do parents, do stakeholders, do we get involved in any of this? Because this is over the past 2 years. This is the first time hearing about these continuous plans. I would assume that, again, like you said, the continuous plans are part of the strategic vision that generally the board sets, I believe, every 3 years-ish or so. But besides the district having input, when does everybody else get input, or do we not?
So in terms of the continuous improvement internally, we do that internally. Where we have external feedback from our parents, community, et cetera, is we do have an annual stakeholder survey. So I'm going to back up just a little bit so that hopefully I can be clear, because obviously, again, there's a lot to all of these pieces. So this is really our internal monitoring system. When we did our strategic plan work, we had significant participation externally and internally, and that was intentional. So when we ran that process, one of the things that we were very committed to is making sure that we had as much voice in that process, because this is as much our family and communities plan as it is our plan, right? It should represent what it is that our community wants and we want for our kids. So off of the strategic plan and off of that feedback, that external stakeholder feedback, we created from all of the data, we analyzed it, synthesized it, and we came up with what are referred to as DDEs, or desired daily experiences. So these are basically what our students said they want, what our families said they want, what our staff said they want. And so we have those documents, and there's like 3 to 4 overarching DDEs for each one of those stakeholder groups. And again, we have aligned all of these pieces, right? So then what we do is to monitor our progress externally on our strategic plan. This is our internal mechanism, and then we do an annual stakeholder survey based on those desired daily experiences that our families and students and staff said they wanted. So this is just, Sandy will talk a little bit more about assessment in just a minute, but those are sort of the two big ways that we monitor progress based on our strategic direction.
All right. Brett.
Can you maybe clarify a little bit about the scoring? Because I think you broke it out into 5 different categories. This just shows red, yellow, green. So that part didn't jive for me. I was just curious to know if you could explain that a little bit better.
Sure. So the semi has a very specific scoring system, 2 being the best, 0 being the worst. And then from there, depending on what your score is in a particular component, that tells you how you're doing. These dials were just a visual representation of those scores, just to kind of show more visually where are we concerned. So the highest level is 1.61 to 2.0. That is vision, meaning you can't do any better than that. Progressing is 1.21 to 1.60. pretty good. Minimal acceptable is 0.81 to 1.20. And as you can see, we have some in that area. High concern is 0.41 to 0.80. And then intervention, meaning absolutely essential and urgent, is 0 to 0.4.
Brian, is your question on the semis?
Yes.
Okay.
No.
I'm assuming we're going to have a number of questions on the assessments
I think
section of it,
maybe we'll
too.
get to that because I think while I appreciate the daily experiences, I don't know if we've got a desired daily experience, but do we have desired academic metric goals? Because while I appreciate the experience, if they don't know how to read, they don't know how to read like that. And so.
So we use a variety. I think it's just important to remember, especially as Sandy comes up here and she will get into assessments, that
Okay.
those data points are critical to informing how we complete the semi.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions on this piece before Sandy comes up?
I think we're ready for Sandy.
Okay. If you do have more questions about MTSS, because it is a big topic, happy to come back or answer any questions.
All right. Good evening, everyone. I'm Sandy Georgie, Director of Elementary Teaching and Learning, and it's my pleasure to be here this evening. My portion of the presentation is to share with you a little bit about our balanced and comprehensive assessment system. So in your packet that we provided you this evening, you'll see a handout that represents this slide and the next slide. As you know, assessment gathers evidence of student learning, including both growth and proficiency. This data is used to help us guide us in our decision-making process. It serves different purposes at the state, school, and district and classroom levels, depending on the uses of the information. Assessments gather information in a variety of ways, including as a universal screener, a diagnostic assessment, progress monitoring, as well as formative classroom assessments, and summative and evaluation pieces. No single assessment fits all needs, but together they show how learning aligns with student outcomes along with the Minnesota Academic Content Standards. A balanced and comprehensive assessment framework uses both standardized assessments as well as classroom assessments, which can include observations, anecdotal notes, quizzes, and tests. These all give us a full picture of student learning, capturing progress with different skills. It provides a larger view of students' achievements, kind of like a photo album, rather than just a single snapshot. Test scores do tell us something about a student, but it does not tell us everything we know about children. Adopting a photo album approach offers a more comprehensive view of student achievement and accounts for instances when a student might have an off day. The system helps students, teachers, families, and administrators to understand learning outcomes. Assessments are designed to do one of the following things: identify or predict students who might need extra support or enrichment, summarize student performance after learning, provide useful information to drive instruction, or evaluate programs and/or policies. Again, no single assessment can cover all purposes well. Each assessment has a specific purpose. As we look at the varied assessment systems that are outlined in your handout and on this slide, you will notice statewide assessments. And if you look at that from more of a satellite view, these are used to evaluate how well students as a whole are meeting standards and ensures access to rigorous content from a systems lens rather than individual student outcomes. They help the state, district, and school leaders assess how well curriculum and instruction align with the state standards. The information is broader than what is gathered at the district or classroom level where the learning happens. In addition, Lakeville administers additional assessments across classrooms and schools. An example of this would be a FastBridge assessment. These assessments, identified by the district, monitor progress, allocate resources, and identify students who are in need of additional support or academic enrichment. And finally, teachers use assessments at the classroom level on a more frequent basis. When assessments are given more frequently, they are more formative. These assessments guide our instruction on a daily basis and communicate learning with students and families. Information at each level of this system is connected through the learning expectations of grade level outcomes, as well as the Minnesota Academic Content Standards. A strong assessment system has a clear purpose, guides instruction, offers data to track student learning, and informs decision-making.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
I just have a question about the information that you're gathering. What system does the district use to like house all of that assessment data? Because I mean, data is only so good as the analyzing that comes from it. So is it easily accessible where all of the data is in one place so staff can sit down and look at all those, like the interventions that come in through MTSS and then the state, the district, and the classroom so that we can make instructional decisions? Like, how is that data housed?
Yeah. Thank you for that question, Director Baker. You are absolutely correct. We do have a data warehouse in our district. It's called EduClimber. It is amazing. It houses all of our data with easy clicks. Our staff has been trained on it, and they use that in their PLCs as well as data digs to help define what are their next steps in student learning. You're welcome.
Can I ask one follow-up to that, just on the data? Like, how granular do we get as a district in collecting data? I mean, are we collecting information results on the formative assessments that are being done at the classroom level as well? And then I guess a related question would be, is the curriculum consistent enough across the schools that we can kind of compare achievement apples to apples from school to school, classroom to classroom?
Yeah. Thank you for that question. When we think about a balanced assessment framework, we're really thinking about it as satellite data, map data, and then street data. The satellite data is that larger picture. Those tend to be our MCAs. And then when we think about our more map data, if you're thinking about it in analogy, that would be your FastBridge. And then your street data is your everyday formative assessments that are aligned to your curriculum and the specific benchmarks and student outcomes. All of that information is gathered either through EduClimber or through the teacher.
So Sandy, if you're looking at consistency through the curriculum as Chair Swanson just mentioned, is there somebody that's analyzing the aberrancies amongst the differences, either good or bad, and determining whether something should be adjusted or something should be shared with the rest of the schools and teachers to do something that would be a benefit?
Yeah, I appreciate that question. So an example would be currently, my team as well as site leaders are looking at the FastBridge assessment not only from last year, but also this year. We're looking at fall, winter, and spring. We're looking at those trends, and we're looking to see how closely they are aligned to what we would like to see for outcomes and the specific student targets. If we're seeing that it's not matching, then we go back and we look from a system lens. Are there things that we need to tweak as it relates to our curriculum? Are there things that we need to consider for our resources? And an example of that would be, from an elementary perspective, is we've been on a journey as it relates to literacy instruction for quite a number of years. And what we did is we looked specifically at our data, particularly in structured literacy and early literacy, and looked at those practices. And we noticed that we had some gaps. And as a result, we went and investigated what might be the best evidence-based practices that we might need to support our teachers through professional development, as well as identify, do our current resources meet those needs, or might we need to consider additional resources? And an example of that would be if you have youngsters at the elementary level, we recently implemented a resource called Sunday Essentials at the K-5 level to support those structured literacy strategies, as well as Haggerty. This coming school year, in the 25-26, we're going to be looking at implementing something that's called sound walls to continue that support. So we're constantly looking at that data at a district level, and then we support our site leaders for them to investigate what that data means for them, and then to adjust what that looks like from a systems level.
Just one follow-up, I guess I'm not really clear. So do we have like reliable data that can show, yeah, certain teachers are, because I'm assuming if we have a consistency in curriculum, I mean, certain teachers just might be doing better at conveying that information and bringing a class along, and it might be different year to year. But do we have the data available that we can see, like, okay, these classrooms, specific individual classrooms, might need some additional resources, or maybe we need to go talk to this teacher who's teaching it really well and see what she's doing, so we can share those experiences with other teachers?
Yeah. You're speaking to a process that we call our professional learning communities, which do meet on a regular basis, and they are looking at that data and having conversations amongst themselves. So if they're finding potentially that their children may be struggling with a certain benchmark, they're able to collaborate as a team to fine-tune what might be those next steps to support that.
Okay. Brett.
As you, and I don't know if I'm jumping ahead to maybe future slides or whatnot, but is there a slide that kind of breaks out sort of where we are with all of these different assessment tools? Do you got something that shows, hey, this is our FastBridge scores, versus the MCAs versus everything else, and kind of show us more of a picture in totality, if you will?
So Dr. McDonald, as she wraps us up this evening, she's going to be talking about what could be next steps as we support you as a Board of Education, and that would be looking at our data dashboard. So that will be forthcoming, and Dr. McDonald will mention that as we wrap up this evening.
Dr. Thompson.
So what do you consider like a good score? Because again, maybe we'll wait until the data component comes, because I'm just wondering, do you pick that score, or does the board come back and say, yeah, we agree that score you're trying to go after is reasonable? Or do you compare that score to other districts, and so it's almost like a self-imposed score?
Yeah, I appreciate that, Director Thompson. So what we have in our district are called target sheets, and they identify what is considered a mastery level or a target for any individual assessment within the FastBridge suite. Those are identified through a national norming process, and we utilize those targets. To your point, Director Thompson, when we think about the READ Act, which was recently passed, where the Read Well by third grade legislation sunsetted, and the READ Act came in place, we actually utilize those assessments to report in a data submission yearly to the state, which is required. And then those assessments are identified by the state. So the state recently stated in legislation that you can choose between two assessments, whether it was DIBELS or FastBridge. We were already a FastBridge district and had been utilizing it for a number of years, so it made sense for us to use that. And then the state actually identifies which measures within that FastBridge suite that you will actually report on June 30th of each year, and those benchmarks are set by national norms, and we utilize those as our target sheets so that we can ensure that our students are on track to meeting those general outcome measures as it relates to their specific grade level.
Dr. Thompson?
Yeah, I think, so I appreciate that background. I think that's helpful. One area that I think as a board we may want to talk about later is around what are those benchmarks? Is this a role that the board ought to play a part in? While I appreciate state benchmarks, state benchmarks are based on their perspective. They may decline in years or whatever it may be. And so for us as a board, if we want a community, we want a standard that's higher than state, right? Who tells the district we want a higher metric? Like, we think we deserve more. We think our kids can get there. So that's a separate conversation.
I'd like your opinion on this too, and maybe Director McDonald could speak on it too. I mean, would you agree? It seems to me that the classroom metrics would be more accurate of what's actually being learned as opposed to the MCA results. I mean, they're good to compare us to other schools, but obviously the kids have a lot more vested in what grade they're getting in the class, on how they perform on the quizzes and tests, versus an ungraded MCA score that has no effect on their
100%. If you look at this particular graphic that we have here, and what you'll notice here is that the more formative the assessment is, the classroom assessment, the more informative it is. We also know that particularly at our secondary level, they have figured that out with the MCAs. And some of our students opt out of those assessments, and so it doesn't give us that full picture, and that's why we use a variety of measurements. So if I want to go back to that analogy, if we think about a photo album rather than just a snapshot, all of these assessments have a purpose and a place as it relates to our system. And when you look at this particular slide, and if you think about the MCAs, they're really intended to evaluate your system and to be able to see if you are on track as a whole as it relates to your curriculum and your instruction. They were never intended to define student outcomes.
So if our MCA scores are not great, does that mean our system has issues that need to be fixed?
So what that tells you is those are things that you need to look at from a system lens. Might you need to be looking at some of your curriculum, some of your instructional practices? The other piece too is that assessment, if we have students or families who choose not to participate in that assessment, we're not getting a full picture either. And so again, that's why we want to have a balanced assessment framework where we have multiple pieces of data before we make decisions, rather than just making it on one snapshot, but looking at the whole photo album. What do the MCAs bring to the table? What does FastBridge bring to the table? And of course, what do the classroom assessments bring to the table? And thinking about what is reported in our continuous progress reports as well.
Brian?
Dr. McDonald, I know that you might have, you're good?
No, you're doing great. So,
Okay.
so for the MCAs, are there any financial limitations or financial ties to it for as if we don't have so many people participate, we get less funding? Do we get more funding? Is there any repercussions for students or parents opting out of these state tests?
No, the only repercussion that we have is that when they opt out, it goes against us as it relates to our overall achievement. So sometimes it's not giving you the best picture of where we are at as it relates to our achievement. Currently, our literacy incentive aid dollars is tied to some of the scores within the MCAs, but the current legislation that's on the books is looking to remove that. So more to come. One of the things as a teaching and learning department, we're always responding to the latest and greatest that comes from our legislatures. Yes, you're welcome. All right, are we ready to continue? One more question?
Oh, sorry.
The question is around, I feel like we're hearing a lot about hitting targets and, making sure kids are at grade level. What about, and there's lots of things that you could say here probably, but what are we doing for kids who are exceeding grade level, and how are we making sure that we're not just, rightfully so concentrating on kids who need additional support, but how are we also providing opportunities for kids to grow in areas that they're showing particular strengths in?
I really appreciate that question. And in an upcoming slide, I'm going to talk about the different assessments we have in our system. And one of the assessments we have is what is called a COGAT. And that helps us with our identification for those enrichment and those advanced learning opportunities. As a former gifted specialist in another lifetime and in a degree in gifted education, those are areas that we value highly. That when we think about tiered instruction, we usually think about students who are maybe not on track for meeting grade level outcomes, but it's also thinking about how do you extend that learning for students that are making those benchmarks, and thinking about it through the lens of enrichment. We think about it through differentiation, which is content, process, and product. How do we enhance the content? How do we increase the process or the level of rigor that a student is engaged in that? And how do they show their learning in maybe a unique and an adaptive way? Both at the secondary and at the elementary level, we have a variety of advanced learning programs that are available for students. Director Anderson is a part of our Gifted Advisory Council. In fact, just at our last meeting, we outlined some of the opportunities that we have across all levels. And I'd be happy to share more on that if that's needed.
Just to follow up with that, at least at the elementary level, are you, what's best practices now in terms of grouping students? So, moving for math or moving for phonics or whatever it might be. What is Lakeville's approach to that right now?
So what best practice and research will say is to really leverage small group instruction, ensure that you have flexible grouping. We talk about whole group, small group, and independent application, and that's really the environment that we want to create for students. So if students are not able at that particular moment in that first wash with, or that first dip with instruction, then we move to small groups so they get additional opportunities. And those are flexible groups based on data. So we're constantly looking at data to determine what it is that students need. And when we think about that tiered instruction, we're also thinking about small group instruction for students who might need advanced learning opportunities or enrichment. And so it's a very fluid process, and it moves back and forth from small group, or excuse me, whole group, small group, and independent application. And if you ever get a chance to visit classrooms, some of our teachers do such a remarkable job. And it's even how they lay the environment in their classroom, and you can actually see that they have spaces in their room to do that whole group instruction. Sometimes it's on the floor that's close to the teacher. And then you'll see these spaces in classroom that are designed specifically for that small group instruction. And children are engaged in independent applications simultaneously as the teacher expertly manages to ensure small group instruction is happening.
Right.
For a future meeting, it would be helpful for maybe some of the board members, and also for me as a refresher of how is Impact Academy doing? Because I know that's been something that's been going on for the past 10 years or 5, I don't know, for a while. And the small group, from what I hear, is the intent of that program, where kids can go based on their speed, based on their readiness. If they're falling behind, they can go into a different group to kind of accelerate, and maybe additional tier 2 support in that level is needed. While I think we should have enough data by now to validate, is that a model that is very advantageous for students to accelerate no matter your level, so that they can go further or get additional support to get caught up?
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Director Thompson. Okay, are we ready for the next slide?
Yeah, I think we cut you off a long time ago, so you
That's
can keep
okay.
going. Yeah.
Just want to make sure everybody's questions get answered. Okay, I think this is where I'm at now. All right, very good. In addition to all of the things that I shared about assessments, they fall into 2 categories. Norm referenced assessments compare students' performance to others. Okay, so as I mentioned, we have these targets that are norm referenced in FastBridge. FastBridge is an example of a norm referenced assessment. Then we have assessments that are criterion reference assessments, and they measure performance against a set of standards or specific learning goals. That would be an example of our MCAs, because those specific learning goals are the specific benchmarks at each of the grade levels. And most importantly, our criterion reference assessments are at the classroom level, as Chair Swanson had mentioned. Those are the ones that give us the most valid data, the most information, and formative to drive instruction and next steps for students.
Yeah, Carly?
When you talk about the norm reference group, and you said earlier it was national norms, right?
Correct.
Do you feel like that well represents our district, or how does that, I guess I'm wondering how our district, in terms of our makeup, and maybe compares to the national level norms? Or what kind of things can you break down in terms of looking
so
at?
what I'd like to be able to do, because I don't have that at my fingertips, Director Anderson, but I know that we'll be sharing with you a data dashboard, so you'll be able to see what are those targets and how we're performing against those targets. In some areas, we do a fantastic job, and then like in other areas, we need a spotlight. And an example of that is a number of years ago, we recognized our early literacy and our structured literacy. We needed to put a spotlight on it. We needed to support our teachers with professional development and evidence-based practices, and then we needed to make sure that they had the resources so that they would be able to execute that. And we're continuing to support that and through those ways.
I guess I was wondering with the norms themselves, and I'm just thinking about the work that I do day to day when we look at, okay, this is a 85-year-old veteran, and I'm comparing him to people in the 80 to 85-year-old group. So I guess I'm wondering, when I'm kind of talking about the representation, how they establish the normative group. Is it quite diverse in terms of rural and urban and different? So I'm wondering, like, are we matched up against a sample that is well represented here?
So I would have to do a little bit more digging with that, Director Anderson, but what I do know is that in our previous data submission for Read Well by third grade, we actually had to show the norming study that was utilized in the district assessments that we utilized to make sure that it was a sampling that actually supported that. We would need to go back and look at what that looked like specific to answer some of your questions, and we certainly could do that for you. All right. So on this slide, what you'll see is a link to our Lakeville Area Schools assessment calendar. You have that in your packet. We are required by the Department of Education to post this on our website. So linked below on the slide brings you actually to our website that outlines all of the assessments. I need to give a very big shout out to a colleague of ours, Cheryl Gangler. She's our MTSS coordinator, and she has really developed this particular document as well as the website outlining our assessments.
Just really quickly, this is in the presentation, which will be found in your packet and board book. Also, additionally, it is a requirement, as Sandy stated, by the state of Minnesota, that we publish this annually on our website for our public. So it's also available on our public website. Thank you. I saw you looking for it, so I just wanted to make sure you knew where it was.
Thank you.
The other piece, before I dive into this a little bit more, the state of Minnesota also identifies the number of minutes you're allowed to assess students at each of the grade levels. So we are within that parameter, some just barely by a little margin. And it makes it challenging because we have to include the MCAs, even though it's assessment that we're required to give to our students. So as seen in our district assessment calendar, Lakeville uses not only the classroom assessments, but also standardized assessments to monitor student achievement, track growth, and check readiness for college and careers. The data helps us adjust strategies and resources, as I mentioned earlier, to support students better. The district-wide calendar, as Dr. McDonald had mentioned, can be found on our community-facing website on the link that is within your slide deck. And it lists local and statewide assessments by grade level and shows when they are given. Per the READ Act, we must use, as I mentioned, either FastBridge or DIBELS, and we currently are a FastBridge assessment, for universal screening of reading 3 times a year. That is required by state statute. Please note, we are still waiting for the Department of Education to release the required screeners in grades 4 through 12. Our calendar also includes the mode, the time and purpose and reasoning for each assessment. Results are shared with families, including through the parent portal, when appropriate. Now I'll highlight each of the district assessments. The FastBridge assessment, as I have been mentioning earlier, tracks progress towards grade level outcomes, informs instruction, and measures student growth and evaluates the effectiveness of the interventions. Within the FastBridge suite, there is a SABRS assessment, which identifies students at risk for social emotional behaviors. The COGATs measure students' academic aptitude and cognitive development. The assessment supports the identification of advanced learning and enrichment opportunities. Honors placement is a performance assessment used to measure a student's readiness for advanced course placement in grades 7 and 8. And the MCAs, the Minnesota Comprehensive Assessments, and the MTAS, which stands for Minnesota Test of Academic Skills, designed for special education, measures reading, math, and science achievement of Minnesota academic content standards for state and federal accountability purposes. The Access Assessment measures English language proficiency of all English learners for the state for federal accountability purposes. ACT measures students' academic readiness for post-secondary success, and juniors take this assessment during the school day. Bilingual skills, bilingual seals, legislated in 2014, measure proficiency in languages other than English, and a qualifying score may exempt students from taking a foreign language in college. And finally, NAEP, which stands for National Assessment of Educational Progress. At times, we are selected as a district and a site. It is a national reading and math assessment that tracks student academic progress over time nationwide. And so on the document that's in your packet, as well as posted on our community-facing website, you will see all of those pieces outlined there for you. Yes, Director Baker.
Just one quick question, just for clarity.
Yes.
Which or what combination of these assessments fulfills our requirement through state statute for dyslexia screening?
That's a very good question, Director Baker. So with the READ Act, we are required to universally screen our students as a whole, and to also screen for characteristics of dyslexia. At a school level, we cannot diagnose dyslexia, but we can screen for children who may show characteristics. Those particular pieces are within FastBridge, and they're the early literacy probes that we utilize. And then, as I mentioned, for the READ Act, we have a data submission. Not only do we need to submit where our students are on those universal screeners, but then we also need to report which students might show characteristics for dyslexia. And in fact, this past month, I've been on several calls with the Minnesota Department of Education as they set what that looks like for identifying what those target scores are for characteristics of dyslexia.
Dr. Thompson?
Let's say a student has been identified for dyslexia. What changes for them? Do they have a different class? Do they have different teachings? Or do they have a different book? What do they do?
Yeah, so thank you for that. Excuse me for just 1 minute. So when we think about that, some of our students may qualify for intense instruction as it relates to special education, or students might receive in a general education setting tiered instruction through either a Tier 2 intervention or potentially a Tier 3 intervention. And so we have classroom teachers that can support our students, as well as tutors, specialized teachers such as our special education teachers, and then sometimes of our students who are English learners, our multilingual learner teachers also support our students. So thank you.
Brett?
Looking at this, is it right that only 2 of the assessments are actually required by statute?
So when you look here, so it would be the MCAs are required, which is tied to the MTAS, the Access, and then with the READ Act, we are required to report on those universal screeners within FastBridge.
Quick question then, so out of all of the assessments that we do, what are kids allowed to opt out of? What is required by state that they can't opt out of? And how does that impact us in terms of, like, either A, funding or overall scores or overall direction of where we want to go and what we're going to do if their data is not included.
So on our Lakeville Area Schools assessment page, all families, regardless of the assessment, whether it's required by state statute or one that we have in place at the district level, all families have the option to opt out. And there are forms that they can complete that are on our website, and there are specific forms as it relates to the state and federal accountability purposes.
Okay. Director Thompson.
Is the where am I going to go with this one? I'll pause. Go ahead.
Did you have more, or could I ask? I had a question when you're all done.
Nope, I just have one more slide, but
Okay,
I'm
go ahead.
welcome to take more
Let's
questions.
take your last slide.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify on that last comment. These are of the standardized tests, that's true, but a formative and summative classroom assessment are required, right?
Yeah.
Or is that true?
So a family can opt out of courses as well, which would then opt them out of that formative and summative assessment.
Okay.
I've been in the district for over 30 years. I've never experienced that. Families, of course, want to support their children on that trajectory for learning, but I have not. That has not occurred.
Okay. One more slide.
Okay. All right.
Just wait.
Are we
Just
ready?
wait. Just wait.
Okay, fabulous. All right, you saw this one earlier with Director Adams, but I'm going to share with it a little bit in a different lens because I want to tie this all together with what I shared with data. Remember, data reveals what students know and can do, guiding our instructional decisions, which align to our Lakeville framework. So as Director Thompson mentioned, now that you have this data, what is the now what? What does that look like? So as a reminder, the Lakeville framework, embedding the Minnesota MTSS framework, is a continuous improvement framework that uses data-based decision-making to support students. Keep in mind, everything builds upon Tier 1 core instruction. As a result, it must be strong in order for the system to work effectively. All students should have equitable access to quality core Tier 1 instruction, which is the foundation for any needed extra support or enrichment. It's important that Tier 1 is designed to meet the comprehensive needs of the vast majority of our students. Tier 2 interventions are considered supplemental. So think about it as core plus more, and sometimes plus more. The Tier 2 interventions should be rapidly accessible and matched to student needs. And those are usually done in that small group setting with that flexible grouping based on data. Tier 3 interventions are intensive and they're individualized. That doesn't mean that the student must receive a one-on-one intervention. However, what it does mean that the student receives instructional support more often. And in education lingo, we call that frequency. And for longer periods of time, and we call that duration. And the intervention is increasingly customized, or intensity, to address students' unique needs. And students in special education, it's like Tier 3 on steroids, with some key differences. Extra funding allows for more intensive, long-term support, and legal protections exist for students with disabilities. And there are more tools to adapt environments and tasks for these students. And as Director Adams mentioned, the bottom layer of this pyramid is the foundation for implementing effective, evidence-based tiered instructional practices which support our students. So it's the now what of the data. Now I have the data, now what? What does that look like?
Brian.
How many students do we have right now from a percentage-wise in Tier 2 and Tier 3?
I think that would vary, Director Thompson, depending on which probe we are measuring. So for example, in the literacy probes, we have some that are measuring letter names, letter sounds, segmenting, and blending. And you can have children that are doing phenomenal in some of those probes, but might need additional support in others. So it's hard to pinpoint what that would look like because we're really drilling down to the specific skill to make sure that the students are on track for the overall student outcome. In addition to the reading piece, we have all of those pieces that are embedded within math as it relates to early numeracy and overall math achievement. So it varies depending on which skills you're addressing.
I had a little cross-presentation question. These semis are per school, right?
So the semi, we have one that we take at a district level and then one that we take at the site level. So you are correct.
Okay. So if we have all the semis for each school and we have all the assessment data for each school, have we done the analysis where we put them next to each other and see, I mean, is there a correlation between high scores on the semis and high scores on the assessments in certain schools versus other schools?
I really appreciate that. It was an activity and an exercise that myself and my team supported sites with our learning specialists who are teacher leaders in our buildings who play a lead role in supporting academic achievement. And we did just that last week, where we looked at their SCOPs, we looked at their FastBridge score, we looked at the district semi, and then we said, is there any gaps? Are we seeing connections that are there? And if we aren't, what do we need to adjust? And so, sure enough, there are spaces where there are places for improvement, and there are other places that were spot on.
So did you see any portions of the semi where there was a greater correlation with success on assessments? Because I believe there are, 5 different areas on a semi assessment? Were certain ones they were doing really well, and that showed, well, and again, causation and correlation are different, but obviously where you could make some connections and maybe get some suggestions as what might be working or where schools need to improve specifically?
Yeah, again, I can share from an elementary level. I think an area where we're seeing some success is within our structured literacy. We have put a spotlight on that, and we are seeing the fruits of our labor, and we're seeing some increases as it relates to those scores. And so we do know that when we do place a spotlight and support our teachers with the resources that they need and evidence-based practices, we can see a direct correlation with that. So that would be an example of what that looks like.
Thank you.
Okay, very good. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Elida Kane, and she's going to share a little bit about the standards review process.
Good evening, members of the board. As Sandy noted, my name is Elida Kane, and I am the Director of Secondary Teaching and Learning. Glad to be here with you tonight. As she mentioned, I am going to touch base on our standards-based review process. The image that you see here on the screen kind of represents the phases that both Sandy and I take our elementary and secondary teachers on a little journey whenever the state updates the standards. You may not be aware, but the state has a 10-year cycle for each of our content areas where they update the standards. There is a multi-year process that they go through. And when those standards are mandated through state legislation for us, that indicates the launch in our process. So that first phase is when we're learning about those new standards. They might not yet be state mandated, but we're learning about them. We're trying to determine what the pedagogical and instructional shifts are, what are the changes within those standards. We're building our team, talking about philosophy and belief systems in that content area, and getting ready to launch that program. Phase 2 is when we really bring those teachers in together. It means that they've been set forth through the state. They are signed, sealed, and delivered and given to us. We've gotten some opportunity to learn from MDE. We take a lot of time to dive deeply into those standards. We unpack them, and what that means is our teachers take a really long time diving deeply into them, understanding what student learning targets and benchmarks would be, what that academic vocabulary is, what the rigor or depth of knowledge is, in order to truly understand how we are going to teach those standards. From there, as we venture into phase 3, we've used all of that learning and understanding to create criteria rubrics based on those standards, based on what we know our students need to know, do, and understand, and what we need as a teaching staff for that content area, to create a rubric where we can then evaluate resources or tools, or what many people think of as curriculum, to make choices that are going to help best take our students on that journey to meet those benchmarks and standards. We then implement that. Oftentimes we do a pilot. Both Sandy and I have been doing that the last several of years. The process started in about 2017-18 with physical education, then art and music, going into science, and now we are dabbling with English language arts, like I said, science and math. So we are really heavy into this process right now. It's quite overwhelming for us and our staff as well. But we'll take some time to pilot those resources because, like I said, it's been 10 years, if not more, since we've had some of those things happen before we make those choices. Then after we implement in phase 4, we take a lot of time to kind of work through that curriculum for a year or so to determine how do we need to monitor and adjust our planning and scheduling guide or our pacing, our scope and sequence. How now do we look at assessments? A lot of what you have been asking for here, those classroom, on the ground, formative, and summative assessments that really measure student outcomes in that class. And then hopefully, if we're teaching to the standards as we have designed, working from phase 1 through phase 4, we'll also see those positive outcomes in our MCA data. With that, one of the things that's tied closely to that standards-based review process then, oops, I hit it on my computer, not on here. It's helpful if I do that, right? Is how do we measure our staff growth and development opportunities with that process? So all of our work then aligns through these 3 buckets that you see on the screen. TDE, which stands for our formal teacher and development and evaluation process. That is our evaluative process that our teachers engage in. This is required by the state. We have no choice but to do this. It's done every 3 years. If you are tenured, and if you are a non-probationary teacher, you will do it for the first 3. It's done by a trained evaluator, so your building administrator will walk you through this process, and it requires updates from the state in 2025. So we have a big team together right now who's evaluating our current TDE rubric and aligning it to the new standards of effective practice that were provided to us last year by the state to do an overlay. So looking at what do we have going on right now that meets those SEPs, and what do we need to do to make changes and improvements there. Also within our TDE, including teacher goals, oftentimes professional learning community goals, and building goals to help have teachers have a focus there. That relates directly to the QComp side of things. That is our alternate teacher professional pay system, very heavily leaning on our PLC process there. So our teachers will have a goal that is directly related to their SCOP goal that you heard Nicole mention earlier, that then those SCOP goals at each of the buildings related to our strategic goals here at the district. They also engage in coaching. Our staff identify goals and strategies that I mentioned. They align that data, and they also have to do a portfolio reflection. So they do that mostly with our coaches, and then they have to do a one-on-one check-in and check-out with their administrator on that each year as well. So completing all of that allows them to engage in that additional pay. Yes?
Can I ask, generally speaking, how often they meet in a group like that?
PLCs?
Yeah.
Meet weekly.
Weekly, okay.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So when these teachers have goals, who creates these goals?
The teachers create their goals.
So the teachers create their own goals.
Correct.
And then if they meet their own goals, they get a bonus.
Well, it's a little bit more complicated than that, but in a nutshell, that is part of it, yes. There are multiple things that they have to complete. They have to complete a whole year of PLC collaboration. So for example, I oversee a group of TOSAs, Teachers on Special Assignment. They had to share a goal with me at the beginning of the year, a collective goal, and then an individual goal. In October, their PLC then presented to me what have they done since the start of the school year through the middle of October for both their individual and group goals based on data, based on anecdotal evidence that they have collected. And our teachers do that exact same thing as well with their principals. So that is part of it as well.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead, Director Thompson.
Have we ever never paid a QComp before? Or are they always generally paid out?
There are a handful a year, yes.
Just a handful out of,
Yeah.
okay. And then is the board at all involved in any way in reviewing those?
Not that I have ever been aware of for. The only thing that they would do is, every year we do a QComp process overview, correct?
Yeah, so we will be having a deeper discussion around this with the board quite soon.
Okay.
One of the board's responsibility, so in order to participate in QComp, you have to have an agreement between the union and the Board of Education, much like you would with a traditional contract. And so we're at a place where that will need to be evaluated, and then an agreement reached moving forward to continue that program. That program does provide additional pay to our teachers annually for meeting their goals and completing the process. It also supports our coaches, so they are funded through our QComp program as well. So we'll have some more discussion around that. We'll do some learning around that. We'll take a look at what the current plan is in place and see where we want to move forward. As you also may be aware, there was a proposed cut in this area through Governor Walz's preliminary budget proposal that came out last week. So that may also play into this as well. But we'll be coming back, Brian. Thank you for the question to have more dialogue around that.
Director Baker?
Thank you. I'm just looking at supports for teachers, and I see that we have coaching on there. I'm curious, do we have a mentorship program in place for newer staff?
We do not have a formal mentorship program across the board. We are looking at that right now, and Emily may want to come back up in a moment. However, what I will say is that our coaches have taken that on over the last couple of years, on top of their already required work. Our secondary ones I'll speak to specifically right now have created a very thorough plan to make sure that they are doing multiple outreaches to all of our new teachers, including the ones who started last year. So they are going above and beyond in meeting with them, collaborating with them, assisting with them, on top of their already very big workload. But did you want to talk a little bit about?
Sure, I can add a little bit to that. There's a long history around this, and I won't go into all of that for time purposes, but certainly happy to answer more detailed questions at a later time. I have been working with Carrie Popp on trying to develop something more formalized at a district level. As you all know, anytime you do a mentor program that involves people, which incurs cost, and so what we have done is strategized to try to reallocate some dollars from our Title II budget, which is restricted dollars that we get from the state for professional development purposes. And so Carrie and I have met a couple times to do something more formal. What we currently have is we collected data from all of our buildings on what they were doing. So things are happening. It's just dependent on a building, dependent on the building resources, and we're really looking for a more district level solution. Our challenge is that whatever we decide, the Title II application plan is due annually, and at any point they could choose not to approve that, so it's not guaranteed money. But we are working together to try to come up with a plan.
So is what we are currently doing, does that fulfill our requirements through state statute?
Yeah, the only requirement in the statute is that we do something. And so they're not really prescriptive, which can be unusual in terms of how we approach that. But we know what's best for retention and support of our staff is to have a solid mentoring program and to be able to support all the teachers in our district from a system standpoint to make sure that they're getting all the opportunities consistently building to building. So,
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Paul?
Yeah, please. I'd like to go back to Director Thompson's question, and I know you mentioned we're going to talk about that later, but point of clarification. Am I understanding that teachers set their own goals to get a bonus? Human nature would suggest that you would set a goal that's very achievable and not maybe in the best interest of what the intent of the goal is. Help me understand that.
Our teachers do have the opportunity to set their own goal, but it does have to be based on their site SCOP and the district SCOP. So most of them will choose a literacy goal and then an additional one on top of that. So they're going after district achievement, usually through literacy. That is our main focus area for the last 3 years, it has been.
Do they set their own metrics?
Yes, they create their own SMART goals.
Well, therein lies my question.
It has to be approved by
Okay,
administration.
so there is somebody who's approving the goals,
Okay.
essentially?
Yes.
Okay,
Okay.
all right, that helps clarify. Okay.
Brett?
Who are the coaches?
Yeah.
Our coaches, their acronym is IDSS, more acronyms, I know, sorry. Instructional Data Support Specialist. So they help with instruction and then data. So when they're working in their PLCs, either collectively or independently, looking at formative classroom day-to-day data, they can do a variety of things. So if you're a teacher and I'm your coach and you share your goal with me for the year, you might invite me in and say, could be a variety of different things. I want to improve my classroom management strategies around literacy specifically. And maybe I'm a physical education teacher, so that might be something that feels a little bit new or different for me. So I might stand in the back of your classroom for 30 minutes and tally how many times I see you explicitly teaching vocabulary or even doing reading with students. People don't realize that they're doing a lot of these things, and then also offer additional ideas and support for you to strengthen in that area.
Sure.
So that is a big thing that they do, as well as provide resources and support. Just day-to-day needs, sometimes they're a great go-to for people.
So it's a internal support structure. Are they based in the building? Are they based at the district level? Are they?
Great question.
Like how
Our
many of them,
elementary,
like how does it go?
They
How
are
does it work?
split between two buildings. So if I was an elementary TOSA for an IDSS, I would be between two. The secondary TOSAs that I oversee, they are by content. So they all see approximately 100 teachers per year on their caseload, and they are all over the district. So they do a lot of running around to the secondary buildings.
How many do we have total?
Excuse me?
Like how many total then are
They
we
each
talking
have about
about?
100 on their caseload.
So
We
8
have
of them?
only 8.
Around 450, 475 teachers at the secondary level.
Okay.
Is that what you're asking me?
No,
How
do
many
you mean how
coaches?
many?
He's asking how
coaches?
many
Total number
IDSS
of
coaches do we
Yes.
have in the
Apologize.
district?
Roughly 800 teachers, so I'm thinking we
Yes,
have like
we have
8 of these, 9 of them?
Yep.
10, okay.
Is that enough?
Amber?
No.
Okay, go ahead. Sorry, Amber.
Visceral reaction.
This might be a question for a later time too, but I'd be curious to hear, like QComp, as I understand it, is a state program, right? That districts could opt in. It was a Tim Pawlenty legislative move, right? And districts could opt in or choose not to. So I know there are some districts that chose not to. So it'd be curious to learn, like, maybe the history of why Lakeville enrolled, right? But also, what are the benefits of continuing to participate in the state program? And then another question I have with teacher evaluation in the first column, how, and maybe it's just how it is, but especially for the elementary level, like I know we have such varied numbers of teachers based on building size, right? And so I'm cognizant of like some principals are having to do a lot more teacher evals, and those take a ton of time. Is it just tough luck, you have to do it, or are there extra supports for principals at large sites to offset the evals so they can focus on other things too?
So at our elementary, unless there is an assistant principal, it does have to be done by a licensed administrator. So yes, it does fall on the shoulders of those principals at the elementary, and our elementaries are large for having only principals. At the secondary level, our deans at the middle level and our assistant principals at the high school level are certified licensed administrators, so they do split up and divvy up that load. There's oftentimes more behaviors and other things happening at our secondary levels as well, so it does help to kind of even that workload a bit. But yes, it is quite taxing for our elementary administrators.
Brian?
So, and as a elementary administrator, that would be like a principal, and then on average, I think there's about, how many teachers do we have in an elementary school? Is it about like 50, or is it?
What would you say?
We run about 3 to 4 sections per grade level, so that's just classroom teachers, and then you have your special education teachers and all your support teachers.
Got it. So the principal is doing roughly 75-ish evaluations throughout the course of the year for those individuals. Okay, and then obviously at the secondary level, you've got the principals. Now you also have 4
APs at the
assistant
high
principals
school.
now to help assess, and those 5 can do evaluations as well.
They can, and they do.
Okay, got it. Back to your coaches, you only have 9 for 800 teachers that we have, and that seems an area that we should look into. And so I heard earlier that you said these coaches also do the mentorship program. in addition to doing the QComp training and miscellaneous.
And even more, I just would love to take that moment and piggyback on that. They're amazing people. Both Sandy and I, our coaches are always willing to step up the plate to support our standards-based review process, professional development, and anything that they're asked to do.
Yeah.
They truly are teacher leaders in this district, and they go well above and beyond.
So I guess I'm just wondering that where then are other teachers allowed to help in the mentorship program,
Oh, of
or
course.
only just the coaches can do that?
No, let's say that you and Director Anderson and I are on a algebra team, and I'm brand new. The principal would likely tap one of the two of you on your shoulder to kind of be my go-to for the year, and that happens every year as well. So there's always someone who can immediately answer the kind of the business or managerial things that happen in a building, like where are my copies? Like you would think those things should seem simple, but you are extremely overwhelmed when you're first starting. So there are many, many questions on the day-to-day basis when you're brand new, and that person will help them. They'll also help them with curriculum. How do you do grades? When are our finals? What does that look like? So that happens with someone on your PLC team as well.
So isn't that a mentorship program right there, or is it not?
I'm just going to intercede here just a little bit as an educator and say, like, teachers have a lot on their plate already, and it is a lot to mentor a new teacher. And if you have a structured mentorship program within your district, there's usually dollars that are tied to that, so teachers are reimbursed for that time.
And it should also be formalized and based on best practice and research on how someone should be interacting as a mentor and a mentee as well.
So an extra stipend for, or an additional dollars.
Along with a formal process.
And a formal process, which we don't have.
Correct.
Amber?
Great.
Yeah, I think mine piggybacks on your comment, Kim. I think, I have parents who are teachers. My husband's a teacher and has been in multiple districts. And I find it highly unusual that a district our size doesn't have a paid mentorship program. It's kind of concerning. And so I think, I'm glad to hear that we're looking at it, but I think it should happen quickly. This seems like a no-brainer for supporting staff.
Okay, so finishing up this slide, the last one we have is look-fors with our Tier 1 core practices. So as we develop that standards-based review process and kind of conclude that, what our team will then be able to do is kind of create, what is it then, if you are an administrator to come into my science classroom, be looking for? And taking that even a step further, the work of the MTSS task force, Nicole is working with that team to create an even more robust one that is kind of like seals the foundation for pre-K-12. It doesn't matter what grade or what classroom you are. What would be those strategies, those skills, those kind of, even if I just popped into your classroom for 5 to 7 minutes, what would be some things that I should be seeing that would ensure guaranteed and viable curriculum and some consistency in the classroom as well. So all of those get at that same goal of developing and supporting our teachers so that they can be their best selves for our kids each day. Okay, Emily is gonna come up one last time, unless there was another question.
I do. Before you leave, I want to go back to the slide before this one,
Here we
the
go.
standards-based review. So while appreciate the overview, phase 1, 2, and 3, where does the Board of Education, where does the school board get involved in this process? Like, when do we review, when do we not review?
So we do that process through TLAC. So that's the Teaching and Learning Advisory Council. A member of our school board serves on that committee. I believe Dr. Andrew has served before in the past. You didn't? Way back in the day? You were on that committee, weren't you?
I came to a meeting, but it's Terry.
Okay. So Terry Lynn, so we'll need a new person. Brian, you served on it for a short time, didn't you? Just one meeting? We all came
Quitter.
to one meeting.
And that was it.
Yeah.
I know your husband served on our committee. So we have board representation there. Our meetings are, all of our information is always public. We share everything that we're doing in terms of a curriculum review process in more in-depth and more detail. Sandy did hers in December. I did mine in January. And that is an opportunity for us to publicly share what we're doing and get feedback as well. So someone will be joining that committee from here on out, correct?
Correct.
Wonderful.
Big fat maybe.
Maybe.
Thank you, Elida. Okay, we are going to wrap up. I just have 2 quick slides. I'm going to bring us back and kind of reground us in systems level thinking. As we try to move the system, one of the things that is really important is that people understand what their role is whenever we're implementing anything. So in education, as you heard Sandy speak and Elida speak about all of the thousands of things that happen in our classrooms every day to try to make sure that we have a pulse on what's going on and we can put in the right things in order to make positive change. So this is our implementation workflow. Essentially, this won't surprise any of you, but at the district level, we are really focused on continuous improvement learning work. So that's when we identify issues in the system. What do we need to know? What research needs to happen? What things need to be addressed? What processes need to be followed? And then we work with both leaders and staff in the system to prepare the system for change readiness. Once that happens and that those 2 phases are complete, then the work is handed over to the buildings to manage and monitor. So for example, if we're implementing a new curriculum, Sandy and her team and Elida and her team would gather the leaders, gather the teachers, go through the processes, make the decisions. We would bring on the rest of the people that need to be brought along, the other teachers, our learning specialists, whomever, our coaches. And then once that is all done, the expectation's set, then it goes to the building, and then our standard work is managed at the building level. And then any change management from a building standpoint, not a district standpoint, is managed at the site level. So that's really how we partner together, not only with our district teams pre-K-12, but also with our administrators and our teacher leaders in the building. One of the questions that was asked was just to maybe address some challenges. Again, I don't think that there's anything on here that will be surprising. We tried to keep it pretty high level just for the purposes of this conversation. But anytime you're doing big systems change work, we really face challenges around time, capacity, and resources. Right now, capacity is really challenging. Particularly when you think about our elementary teachers who are generalists, and every time there's a standards-based review process, those teachers have to go through that entire process every single time. At the secondary, our capacity challenges are around the fact that they serve 200 sometimes students a day. They're trying to manage that. They're also trying to manage not only all of the core areas, but all of the elective opportunities for our students and finding time to bring them together. Right now we don't have a lot of professional development time for our secondary, so you'll see that up there. But it's really trying to figure out how we can maximize and be most efficient and prioritize our areas of need, because as you know, we try to do too many things, we do nothing. And we want to stay the course and make sure things get implemented well. When that becomes problematic is under the capacity area, when we are constantly getting new mandates, updates, legislation that tells us that we either have to do something else or shift course, whether it's working or not, that sometimes can be a challenge. I do think, too, as we have gone through the process of implementing the READ Act at the elementary level, which has been significant for us, really good work to do. 100%. And our teachers and Sandy's team are doing an incredible job of working through that and doing the learning required there. The challenge is that sometimes when you have non-practitioners making decisions for practitioners, they don't know all the nuance of the system. And so as we've gone through this process, things have changed and things have changed and things have changed, because what has happened is people didn't really understand what it would be to implement something to this degree in our system. So secondary assessments, it's really a time and capacity issue there. We need more time for our teachers to be able to come together to work on those formative and summative common assessments, so we can have those, be able to have those conversations not only in the PLCs in our building, but cross-building as well. And then our school schedule, we don't have time right now in our school schedule to be able to provide the level of support and intervention and extension and enrichment that we want for our students, and that's just a result of our schedule. So those are just a few things that we think of as we go through. We try to make the most of what we can in the most efficient and effective way, but certainly those are some of the challenges that we face on the day-to-day.
So just one quick question on those challenges. I totally hear you about people that are making laws that don't understand education. Has there been thought within the district about like a legislative committee that would keep track of like the things that are going through the legislature and then reach out and advocate on the district's behalf?
Yes, I don't know, Superintendent Baumann, if you want to weigh in on that. We've had some conversation around there, around that. Our professional, we have one primary professional organization that does work through their members to put together a legislative platform, and that's AMSD. MASA, which is our other professional organization, also has a legislative platform. What you'll find is most times they're very similar in terms of what they're advocating for. So our role in the past has really been to participate and inform, to make sure that people are aware of the challenges so that they can be prioritized in a platform down the road. There are many boards that also adopt a legislative platform. Oftentimes, again, they're aligned with what AMSD and MASA have, but that's an option as well. Thank you, Kim.
Emily, I had a follow-up. We had a discussion last week a little bit, before you prepared this presentation, and it kind of stems off something Brian was talking about earlier. If the board's goal is to set some specific goals for the district as far as academic outcomes are concerned, what in your mind would be, fair assessments to measure?
So I love this question. I appreciate this question. One of the conversations I think might be worthwhile to have is we have a compliance report for the state that used to be called World's Best Workforce. Now it's called CACR. Can
you spell that?
See, it's on your sheet. I hope, now that I said that. Anyway, the purpose of World's Best Workforce is to set district level goals in 5 metric areas. And those metrics are, thank you. And those metrics are intended to provide a sort of a snapshot of the district as a whole from pre-K through graduation. So you have to have a goal around kindergarten readiness. You have to have a goal around academics, so math, reading. We have to have a career and college readiness goal. We've used ACT in the past for that. We have to have a graduation goal. So this might be a really good place to partner to come together around the development of those goals for that particular plan, because that is something that is state required. It's something we want to be paying attention to. And certainly if there were sub-goals, interim goals or other things that we wanted to build off of, we could do that. But I just pose that as an idea because it's something that exists in the system already and allows us to maybe come together and say, this is what we really want for our students in these areas, and these are you have to identify the metrics, you have to have a SMART goal, the whole 9 yards.
Brett.
So that's required set by the state.
Correct.
So one of the things that I was really hoping to get out of this today is sort of where do you think we are today? And I saw the semi-dashboard.
Sure.
And looking at that, one could argue we're okay. We're not blowing the doors off, if that's our own assessment, right? I mean, how does our FastBridge scores compare to others in the state, to the nation, to that kind of, like, where are we though from a teaching and learning perspective, like from an academic perspective? You guys talked about like we got to have that full photo picture book, right? What is it?
Yes.
Well,
So
like, that's the one thing that's missing from right now.
So let me go to the next slide.
Okay.
Because Sandy's analogy, I appreciate it, of having a photo album and not just a single snapshot, right? We have a district data dashboard that I just took a snapshot of the very first part of the page. I think Kim and Carly have probably seen this before. So what we would like to do is have an opportunity. It is multi-page. It includes academic data, behavioral data, attendance data, other metrics to really give us a full picture of the district as a whole. Because the reality is that if we want to increase academic outcomes for students, which we do, we have to be we can't just pay attention to the academics. We have to pay attention to the system and how the system is functioning. So this really helps to sort of inform us to be able to plan forward to say, okay, here's some areas we might need to plug in, we might need support in, something is rising to the top, we need to work on that, or we need to, Sandy talked a lot about helping teachers through these processes. So I think tonight, what I really wanted to do was lay the foundation for you, because there's a lot. And that's sort of the tip of the iceberg, and then maybe come back and walk through all these metrics and have those conversations, because I think what we want to do is we have compliance reports and we have other things that are required of us, and there are things that we pay attention to. Behind every one of those numbers is a child. And so we're always thinking about the child behind the number. And that's sort of what drives our thinking. So we have to get clear on how are we collectively defining success for students? What are our pictures? Instead of, is it just one, or is it actually a photo album? So I think that is a great conversation to have, Brett. And to me, that would be a natural, and I know Chair Swanson and I talked about that a little bit at our last meeting, about what's the next step to keep the conversation going. Because there is nothing more powerful than if we all get on the same page and we talk about, this is what our community wants for our kids, this is what we want for our kids, and this is what we're going after, and this is how we're going to be able to come back and tell you whether we're doing it or not.
Brian?
And so I think where you're trying to get to is what I would view as what are our board goals? What do we want as a board? And I mean, and not there are other things, but in regards to academics, like what are the objective key results, the OKRs that we want for at the elementary, at the secondary, and even at the operational and staff level. And then we'll come back to these, or then we can go to these metrics and say, all right, what are the key performance indicators that tie up to those? So on the same page.
Well, yeah, and we almost need to get more specific, though, like what metric are we using? You know, because is the MCA the metric? Is the FastBridge the metric?
So you will see all of that on this. I know this is only just a small portion of the dashboard. It's quite lengthy. But you will see the world's best workforce results on there. You will see FastBridge. You'll see growth data. You'll see MCA scores. So it's really all there. So just to sort of to familiarize you with where it'll be a little bit behind time, but this is sort of as much up to date as we can provide to you. And what does that look like? And then where do we want to have more conversation?
To be continued, right?
Thank you.
To be continued.
Really appreciate it. I mean, I think I speak for all of us. I mean, this is of utmost importance, and if we're not doing well in this area, then we might as well not be on the board. So we appreciate all the information and the investment you're making in us, and more time that will be spent on this subject. So looking forward to it.
Mr. Chair, can I say one thing?
Absolutely.
The key here, I think, to the points that everybody here on this board is making around goals and standards. We need to get to that next step, and we need to do it quickly. Mm-hmm. Would we all agree on that?
Yeah.
Okay. I just want to make sure I'm supporting you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Chair Swanson and Board of Education. We certainly appreciate the time and the questions, and we look forward to the next time. And also, we just want to say thank you for your partnership, because we do know that we're all here in the best interests of our kids, and that's the most powerful work you can do. So thank you as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we need a short break? Or are you guys good to keep? All right, we're going to recess for 5 minutes. Only 5.
Yeah, he's back there.
Superintendent Bauman and I were just talking about the issue of setting goals for the district on academics, which I think we do need to discuss in the near term. I'm just not sure if we know enough right now to set realistic goals, right? I mean, it'd be easy for me to just say, I want to make sure our science MCA score is at 75% in 3 years. And it's like, well, I mean, there are a lot of different factors that come into play. So, and we might need to get more, I don't know if granular is the right word, but bring it more down to the classroom level to some extent too. But Director Thompson?
Yeah, just a few notes that I took, and not for us to solve today, obviously, but I think something to put on the back burner. One, the strategic plan. I believe I recall hearing that the strategic plan needs to be reviewed or at least updated every 3 years. And so is that something we do this year? And part of that strategic plan review, we may want to incorporate some of these things into it. For example, the self-evaluations, like, do we want to know what the results were? I mean, as a board, is that at the management level? Is that at the governance level? Not that we need to sign off on it, but is that something we need to be aware of? The Fast Bridge, these benchmarks, are these benchmarks that we want to set, or are these benchmarks that we have to sign off or just be aware of that our district has decided these are the things that we want to go after? The advanced learning programs, small group instructions, and how Orchard Lake, is there enough data to show, does that model work, and is that something for consideration elsewhere? Standards-based review, where does the board get involved in reviewing curriculum? And I believe TLAC is an area, but is that an area that we think we want to move, that we want to continue moving forward? QCOP, I think that's an area that we should take a look at, making sure that our IDSS, if we only have 9 coaches for 800 staff, is that enough? And then lastly, the mentorship program is what I documented where, like, yeah. So those are a few glaring, those are a few notes that I took, and so hopefully future meetings can have them on the agenda where we can dialogue and discuss what the gaps are and how we can remediate some of those where we can.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, I think we'll get into it in a couple weeks when we get into finances too, as far as what funds are available. Because obviously all of this is going to cost money. If we're shifting and looking for more coaches, we'll obviously have to pay them. And yeah, so we do have some limited budgets. So, all right. But yeah, definitely want to continue that discussion, and we will have it on another agenda coming very soon for further discussion. Moving on to board committees and councils, I did want to get, a take maybe from Superintendent Bauman, who could provide his expertise on this, and some of the existing, or the board members that have been on for longer than 3 weeks, on what their thoughts are on the various councils, value that we'd bring to the councils, or, and I'm going back to a comment Carly made last week, was just being careful about what our commitments are and spreading ourselves around. So,
were you guys? Oh, yeah. It's been I've been kind of digesting this evening, so I really appreciate all the presentation, and some of it I think for those of us who have been on the board is review, and some of it is still new, or it's a very good reminder of the information. But it has made me reflect on kind of the committees that there are resolutions for tonight. What I see as the benefit for all the councils that we serve on is really an educational purpose. It is great to have a board member as a representative to kind of bring information back and forth. But when I reflect on what has been helpful for me in terms of serving on various councils, it's just getting educated about all of these things that are happening in the district. So, you know I've expressed an interest in doing TLAC, and that's because I haven't done TLAC, and I would love to learn more. But I've learned a ton about the Gifted Advisory Council and what we do in gifted education. And so I see these roles as extremely valuable, just to get all board members, even as we rotate across these different councils, up to speed on what they're all about and what they're doing in the district. So my concern about some of the proposed new these resolutions for new board committees is I just don't, as we're talking about establishing goals, I think that is so important to come first. So even thinking about where did the policy committee and where did the public engagement committee come from, those were really developed out of board goals. And right now I see a bit of a gap in terms of where everybody's knowledge base is, what role we really should be serving. So even asking, Brian, you asking, what is our role? Is it more, do we get into the management? In my opinion, we don't. We stay at the governance level. And so some of this I see kind of moving into more management without really having the knowledge base. So my recommendation would be to kind of definitely assign us to the various councils. This is just my opinion, I realize. And maybe put some of these new board committees on hold until people are just more up to speed and we really establish our goals, and then those goals can drive what our committees for the next couple of years are. That would be my recommendation.
Can I ask your thoughts on the committees? And as to the resolutions, I mean, they're just drafts for consideration, because my thought was, if we're going to have these committees, they should be limited in what they're looking at, so we don't get into work that we've already delegated to the district office, essentially. Some of it might be, coming up with ideas that we then send to the district office, for further review, and that we can report back to the larger board. But want to get your thoughts on, do we keep the policy committee? Or does everything just come in front of the board? Do we keep the public engagement committee? Or does that just become a function of the board as a whole? Because I think one thing as a newer board member, the operation of the school district is so much larger than I think any individual realizes until they get into it. And so specializing is a problem. I mean, how quickly can you gain the depth in everything to know? And is that even an efficient use of our time? So that's kind of where I see the role of the committees, but I would like your take on, do you see value in any of the four or five committees that have kind of been thrown out there?
I think the policy committee to me is so when we first, Kim and Brian and I first started on this board, and Bree Shinley was still on the board, she was kind of identified as the board representative for going to the district policy discussion. And to me, that was a great way to have board representation. And she then, as I understand it, Brian, you can speak to this, but then brought some information back to the policy committee as we established it. So the policy committee, to me, one of our, and Brian has brought this up many times, and I think it's very true, is one of our kind of core roles as a board member is to evaluate policy and create policy and improve policy and do all of that. So I do think that having a committee helps keep all of those things in motion, and that's one of our fundamental roles. The Public Engagement Committee, and Kim and I were, and Terry was on that too, that really came from, okay, we identified this as a board goal, and if we have a committee on it, that means we're going to come. We did. We came with ideas for events, and then all board members were invited to attend those. So I think whether or not we maintain, I do think some of the information about that we got from the district today in terms of, families, there not being that great result on how, I forget the name of it, but it was the data on the family connection piece. To me, that suggests that it would probably be great for us to continue working on the board public engagement, but that's just my lens. The new committees, I just, and maybe it would be kind of shifting the points or the identified roles of the committee. I felt it was kind of getting too in the weeds when we don't have a good, I think what was very much demonstrated tonight is people have lots of questions. We need more education. And so I would just propose we put those ones on hold until, we people do feel like they have more education, or maybe just change the function of them to more idea bringing as opposed to designating kind of what the goals should be for the district.
Brian or Kim?
Yeah, I mean, last year we didn't have any. We had a couple. We set up these two last year. The policy committee, I think it's structurally how we do it from a process wise is a bit flawed. Again, the reason I say that is because when I talk to other districts, they don't have a model where there's two tracks that occur, one at the district track and one at the school board track. So combining them and having administration as part of a part of the board policy committee makes sense, because again, I'm looking at 23B.09 state statutes. Our primary job is that the board shall make, and when deemed advisable, change or repeal rules relating to the organization and management. I mean, so it's our job is pretty much to do policy. So when we only send one member to the district's version of policy reviews, we're not doing our job. So other districts, they have at least 2, if not 3, as part of a board committee, and then they bring in the HR person, bring in the superintendent, and then those 5 are the ones that are tasked to go through the policies. They're part of the committee, and then they bring forward to the rest of the board, here's what we've reviewed, here are the updates, here's what we want to get changed. And so this goes back to a little bit of do all 7 of us need to be in every single topic, category, work stream of school board, of a school district, or do we need to divide and conquer? So in regards to the policy one, I'm very in favor of having that definitely in place. In regards to the finance and facilities one, the board signs off prior to January 1st of each year. We are responsible for signing off of the budget, and we're supposed to approve and adopt its revenues and expenditure budgets for the next school year. I think the reason I want this is because the past 2 years of my experience is it's still a black hole for me. I don't know. While I understand we spend $250 million a year, but I want to, almost $300 million a year. We're going to spend over $1 billion in 4 years. I want to know, how much does the transportation cost, and have we had a trend? I want to know, are there just from a financial component, getting a budget to be approved 2 weeks prior to July 1st, which is what the past 2 years have been with us, doesn't make sense to me. I've talked to other districts, and board members are part of a finance committee, and they are actively involved discussing their budget for next year as of now. And so they've got committees that board members are involved. They're reviewing it. And then now the administration, they can do the part, or they can say, here are the updates in X, Y, Z. But there are active members on the board that are part of that discussion. I'll pause here because I got more to say, because I know that. Director Cameron.
Yeah, Cameron.
I had a question about that, Brian, because I had a similar thought reading some of the resolutions. Was there's likely already committees at the district level, like finance perhaps, that are doing this business on a regular basis. Can we tap into that rather than creating another thing? So it seems more streamlined, more efficient. And I think that's what you're saying. A lot of districts have board members sitting on the district finance committee with the cabinet or administrator. Is that kind of what you're? I like that. So
yeah. Yes. And so if there is one already existing, I'm not opposed to that. But the intent of this is that the board is responsible for ensuring that we understand what the budget is coming to us, versus having a board member on the finance committee, and they don't get to ask as many questions as they want. So so the way I look at this is that these committees, we take the lead, and we are the ones responsible, and the administration provides all the support that we need to ensure whatever this committee is tasked to do to get accomplished. Now, I don't expect the finance committee, 2-3 members of us, to be experts on the UFARs and whatever, but they need to be able to explain, why are we spending $89 million in salaries and benefits? Why are we spending $43 million in special education versus just a line item. And so, again, I don't expect our board members to be experts, but they need to be able to explain, all right, hey, last year it was 42. The year before that, it was 29. We had a 150% increase. Like, we need instead of having to wait the last 2 weeks before the date to get approved, because that's when we have questions. And then it ends up being, like, rushed through and get approved. So I am in favor of a finance, and I'm open to, does it make sense for us to be a part of them? But I would rather have them be a part of ours. So that's how I would interpret that.
Because, Brian, you were part of the Finance Advisory Council, correct?
I did not make a meeting. No, she was. And then I think, Brett, you made one. And so these Finance Advisory, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I think the challenge is that when you're doing the council, at that level, it depends on how granular you want to get in terms of your understanding. So when you go to the Finance Advisory Council meeting, there's parents in the room who maybe have just joined the committee. And so it is a very high-level overview of the state of the district. And, I think one thing that we do want to be thinking about, too, in terms of what you're proposing, Brian, is, if we ask the district leadership to become part of our committees, that requires additional time, in the evenings. I mean, we aren't meeting during the day. And so I do wonder if there is a kind of more efficient way, as Amber is describing, of how, and Superintendent Bauman, I would love to hear from you too, like, how could we become incorporated in a way where we're getting the deeper level of knowledge, but not necessarily micromanaging, and also kind of not, basically also making good use of your time at the administration level too.
Superintendent Bauman?
So there's a couple distinctions here. First of all, I would say if something's an advisory committee, it's not going to accomplish what Director Thompson's referencing. And to the point of let's just start with budget. You should, as a full board, be walked into any approval of a budget, not a 2-week process. Okay, so if that's what's happened, sorry that happened. Shouldn't happen that way. If you want to have a board committee that's finance committee that includes board members and our CFO, myself, whatever, I'm amenable. I want to partner with however you want to do that to get to, I'm more objective driven about what I hear Director Thompson saying. Managing the board agenda can get at a lot of that stuff. And so advisory committees and functional committees are different. And I think the Finance Advisory Committee is a great one to kind of just give for example. If you have a Finance Advisory Committee, its authority is to provide advice. One of the challenges you will run into very quickly is if you are talking what ifs, which you do in finance planning all the time. What if this? You're running scenarios, you're doing projections, those kinds of things. And this is happening with a ad hoc committee of folks that are, some are experts, some are not experts. They're members of the community, and you're having these discussions. Before the board members hear things, you're seeing it on social media.
Yeah.
And so you have a challenge there with that having an advisory committee that has a task and purpose and a functional value that does not usurp board knowledge and authority around some very sensitive things. And when you're talking finance, I don't care what organization you're in, that's some sensitive stuff because it's putting your money where your mouth is, right? So that's a great example. More to both Dr. Anderson and I think all the conversation here is great. I just want the administration to be able to partner with and make sure that A, there's no surprises, and B, we are providing you the information you need to take votes and do the governance function that you're tasked to do. And then to stand by your votes when you do those would be admirable. So I think if it's a matter of a discussion of committees of the board, which is what I think is being discussed here, and referring to the resolutions that were in the packet, none of those, from my perspective, are particularly positive or negative. I just think some of that can be handled with good agenda management so that the staff can be prepared and all the board members can hear things as they develop. The second thing is on policy. Policy is the business of the board. Administration is for sure, we have a vested interest for obvious reasons, but that is the purview of the board, no doubt about it. And so, in my view, if we were, and I think I heard it suggested that the board have a subcommittee that's policy and that the HR director and myself would join that process, that would be very welcome, actually, at least from my perspective, so that we can help with the policy pieces and make sure that the liability coverages are, accounted for. That would be my primary concern. The rest of it becomes, from a policy perspective, is, again, if the board is deep into policy, doing policy, and voting on policy, that they are also standing behind that policy. That'd be really important, too. So that's my perspective on it. I don't know if that's helpful in any way, but I don't know that you need a ton of committees of the board. I will say this, the point I think Amber made and Carly made around our time as a administration. I mean, we're going to invest the time necessary in order to accomplish the mission, but we do have a place where we drop.
Yeah.
So,
Amber.
I appreciate those comments, Superintendent Baumann. I think given our conversation at last week's meeting, I would appreciate a policy committee. So Brian, I think your idea of having one is, or continuing it is strong. I think having kind of a work team behind the scenes who can edit copy and, bring back copies for discussion is important. Not doing it all 7 of us at the same time, I think, is kind of a waste of everyone's time. So I think for that reason alone, policy committee is important. And I like the idea of integrating maybe the rest of these resolutions into board topics, because I think many of us have interest in lots of these. And I think going back to the other committees, if I'm understanding things correctly, the committees, the staff who run them, maybe even community stakeholders have really invited us to partake, to learn, and to participate on those. And so I think.
Do you mean the councils? Sorry.
Yeah, the councils. Sorry. Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I think to the best that we can, we should show up when we're asked. And so I think at minimum, covering those that we've been invited to, and of course the mandated ones for sure. And then deciding maybe after, and I agree, I think we need to set goals as a board. I think returning to the idea of where are we at with strategic planning and do we need a refresh or a redo? I would like to explore that as well.
I guess that was one of my initial questions too, maybe for Superintendent Baumann or even Emily. I mean, do the councils like it when we show up and start asking questions? Are we welcomed guests, or it's like, yeah, you're board members, so you can come if you want? Yeah.
Oh, thank you for the question. No, we absolutely do appreciate it. One of the things it's come up a couple of times that, we really want to sort of be in this together. So we like it when folks show up, when board members show up, learn about what we're doing, and, talk to us, talk to teachers and community members and whatever. So we appreciate the engagement. And I think to go back to what Superintendent Baumann said, our goal is to always make sure that you do feel informed as a board and work in partnership. So as we think about that, we invite participation in those things.
Mm-hmm. Kim?
So I just want to clarify what happened with the policy committee. The reason that those were separated, as far as the fact that the board had a policy committee and the district had a policy committee, it was that our policies in the district had not been updated for several years and they were out of date with state statute. And because they were so behind and they were trying to go through those and make sure that we were updating those with statute, the board had a separate committee because we didn't want to hinder that work because they were trying to get through them as quickly as possible just to get them updated. Our work was focused more on the 200 series and trying to go through that and set up our procedures and policies as a board. So it wasn't that we wanted two separate committees, it was that we didn't want to hinder the work that was happening within the district to make sure that those policies were updated legally. We still wanted to have, our committee that we are working on through the board, because the 200 series has already went through the statute updates, and we completed that in December previously. So now we can go through and start making changes or looking through them and making sure that it's really encompassing what we want to do as a board and what we need a procedure for versus, or a policy for versus a procedure in our handbook. So that's why there were two separate committees. I think it would be great to combine our efforts there, but I also understand that the district is still working through that process of updating the policies for statute. So that's just something to keep in mind as a board. As far as the engagement committee that we had as a board, again, that came out of our board goals, as Director Anderson had stated. But then also to keep in mind that our public engagement is our participation on those councils that we have. That goes into, how we're engaged. Public is there, parents are there. We're also interacting with members of the executive cabinet that run those committees too, or those councils. So I don't want to interchange councils and committees. And I think that's important because it is developing that relationship with the executive committee or the executive cabinet members outside of the board table or away from the board table, and hearing their expertise and just having a more casual conversation about some of those different things. So I do feel like the advisory councils are important. As far as all of the committees that were listed that we were considering, finance, I think when I look at that and I look at the Finance Advisory Council, I'm wondering if we just say, I don't know if we need the Finance Advisory Council as much as Director Thompson is stating, do we just shift that over into a finance committee of the board so we can get more in depth into those finances? I feel like when I look at the legislative session, finance, I think, is going to be very important this year moving forward. Thinking about, we're kind of in a deficit year as far as the legislative session goes. We don't know how much money we're going to get. Might be 1.5, might be 2%, I don't know. And then given some of the cuts that the governor has suggested, I just think that finance is going to be very important.
So just so I'm clear, so you'd be pro the policy and finance committees then? Mm-hmm. Okay. Any thoughts on HR negotiations and academics?
I do agree with HR or at least contracts. Is that what you're saying? Mm-hmm. I don't know if it's something that's needed all the time, and I don't know if it's something that we need where they have to meet every month, or if they meet when we're actually going through some contract negotiations, and more to provide some expertise to the board as a board member that's there that can kind of explain things to the rest of the board.
Carly?
I think one of the things that was hard when we were going through negotiations last year is feeling like not one board member had been kind of present during the negotiation process. And I want to be really clear, we don't have, from my perception, we don't have a role really other than to kind of observe. But I think that would have been kind of critical to how we as board members felt about going through that process. So, one thing to consider is, do we, because we do, as this, in terms of the HR one, we do get pulled into grievance situations toward the tail end. And so maybe it's, if we have a situation, so I want to kind of, sorry, I'm circling around, but I kind of want to reinforce what Superintendent Baumann said, that some of the things that I think it's clear that the board members are wanting from these committees, I think we could create different practices to involve board members at different levels. So we can go, for instance, to meet and confers, just to kind of see, what is happening as we are approaching negotiations. We could identify 1 or 2 board members who are attending negotiation meetings to make sure that there's board representation. For me, that might be a little bit more kind of getting at the meat of what people are feeling they want versus creating, again, I am thinking about kind of efficiency, and these meetings are at night. And I mean, just for the time that I was on both the public engagement committee and the policy committee, that was, plus board meetings, it is a busy schedule that I don't know that the fruit of that labor, I don't know is worth it versus being strategic about how we include board members in different spaces.
Sure.
And just to Director Anderson's point, I would say for the past 2 years, we haven't had a lot of reports from the executive cabinet. So I really appreciated the teaching and learning report that we had tonight. And if we were to have more structured reports from the executive cabinet on things that we know are going to be coming up, I think that would take care of a lot of the education that board members are looking for. I told Dr. McDonald, I thought it was refreshing. I really appreciated hearing what they're doing. I mean, that's our target as a board, is hearing about what's happening with our students. We need to be discussing students all the time. It should always be what's best for students. And I just really appreciated that overview that they had tonight, and hearing from the entire team. I just thought it was great. And if we could have more reports like that from the other departments, I think that would kind of hit the target of what we're looking for.
Mm-hmm. Brian.
So I think the challenge when I hear things like that is that there's 7 board members now, and we just heard all of that. So then who's going to provide them direction on where we want to go? And so that's the intent of these board committees, where we delegate 3 board members to go provide direction, provide guidance, gather things, and then bring it back to us so that we all don't have to go. And there's 7 different opinions and 7 different voices. That the whole concept is no different than establishing a policy committee, having 3 people getting ahead of it. In regards to the finance and facilities, I'm just looking at the resolution here. It's they're reviewing and analyzing financial plans, budgets, forecasts, monitoring the district's financial performance, and there may be instances where there are no metrics or reports. So I would assume that this committee would be the one working with the administration to building them and then bringing them to us and say, hey, here's what we think that you guys might like, because 3 of the board members here agreed to those metrics, identifying opportunities for cost efficiencies and recommending strategies to optimize resource allocation, overseeing facilities planning and management, including maintenance and capital. Now, again, while they may not be, and we can change the content, but the intent of these is so that our board has a good grasp of the financials, the student growth, the boundary issues. It could be from when are we going to need another building, or when are we not going to need another building, so that board members have the ability to weigh in on some of these things, so that the administration is whatever they're going to build and recommend knows that when they bring it to the broader board, they've got general consensus of the 3, the same like the policy committee where they have general consensus of the 3. In regards to the HR negotiations one, again, last year there were instances where we didn't know what was going on. How many resources should we have? What is the average cost of these resources? Who's responsible for going to these grievances? It's going to be one of the 3. We didn't have any members involved in the negotiations, and I feel like these 3 individuals that would be on the HR negotiations committee would be on the negotiations team. That would be my intent. You guys would be there to be a part of it. Now, obviously, the direction would come from the broader board during our discussions, but this is our district, and I mean, this is our school, and I keep looking at the school district state statutes. Our job is the care, management, and control of these school districts, and is vested in the school board. I mean, that's our job. And so when I think about academics, that particular committee, all that we just talked about, when we have them come back, we're going to get 5% done, and then they're going to come back again to talk about the next topic, another 5% done. And so the intent is the curriculum, the standards-based reviews, the mentorship program, come back and work separately and say, all right, here's our recommendation based on what we found, and 3 boards align with the objectives and the results. Now, do they have to be at 7 o'clock at night? They don't have to be. They can be at 8 o'clock in the morning. They could be at 5. And so I understand previous board meetings were later at night, but they don't have to be. And so we can, and we have the flexibility to accommodate administration staff as well as board staff and board availability. But I feel like having these kind of committees gives the board the authority that where it belongs. So those are my thoughts. I'm in favor.
I appreciate that, Brian. And I think for me, establishing the policy or re-engaging the policy committee makes sense. I can understand the finance committee as well. For me, the other 3, right? Public engagement, academics, and HR. How I read them, the charge is doing the business of our executive cabinet members or their staff. And so I don't think it's a problem to want to know what they're doing, obviously, but I feel like we're no offense, Superintendent Baumann, but we're paying you to do a job, and I feel like this is kind of taking that and performing the superintendent's role. I think for me, it's taking a step back right now, and I work, as you all know, I work at the U of M, and I often think of the regents as a similar group of governance, right? They're a little bit more high end than us, perhaps, but their job would never be to work at that level, but they are setting system-wide metric goals for the 5 campuses of the University of Minnesota. And so I think by doing that, they are directing the work of teaching and learning or HR or whatever it might be, but they're not assessing staffing needs or creating professional development. The regents would never get into that level of governance. And so I think we set goals, we hold those goals accountable, and however, and I think I started reading the book you both mentioned in your emails, that I think you used the words guardrails, you set up goals and guardrails, and then you let the staff do the work. And I feel like this is getting into the work rather than setting up the goals.
Yeah. Brett.
I agree with a large portion of that. I mean, in terms of setting up the guardrails and everything else, the only difference is the Board of Regents is a completely different animal at the University of Minnesota level versus an elected board by the constituents of this community. I mean, we are tasked, we were elected, we ran on platforms that said we wanted to be involved in this stuff. We wanted to help set that direction. So I think we have to find that blend of, again, strategic, tactical oversight, but I don't know that anybody here wants to actually do the work. We don't want to run the analysis. We want to say, hey, this is the kind of stuff we need to know. So I think we just have to make sure that I think we're all sort of aligned on the fact that we all have a lot of things to do. We all have other jobs. We can't necessarily just, dive into this and try to take over anybody's role here, because I surely do not want to. But I do want to know more information, especially on certain topics. I'd love to know more of the data behind things. I'd love to, if we had a better way than saying, hey, please come and give a presentation, then we're going to give her 300 questions, and stretch that out, then again, it kind of goes to the point of how much are we going to get done? Are we going to just ask a bunch of questions? Well, I didn't bring that with because I wasn't prepared for that. I didn't know you guys were all going to ask that. How do we need to figure out how to parse that out better, I think, so that we can be more efficient in these meetings and get the information that I think the broader group is all going to want to know, but sort of divide and conquer a little bit. I mean, I don't, because if we all do this we're going to do this this is going to take a long time to actually feel comfortable. I mean, I'm a little bit scared about talking about finance in this kind of setting if we just, hey, give us a presentation and then now where do we go? Like, we could go down so many rabbit holes. There could be so many questions. What level of detail? Where do we want him to focus? Or, that department, where do we want them to, let's start with the general fund. Like, what's all in there? What's left? What's the projection for June 30th? So I think there has to be some sort of balance, I think, with that, because otherwise I think we'll just be here forever.
And I agree with you, Brett. And I think for me, especially being a new board member, having at least foundational knowledge about the core topics, however, maybe these are the core topics, is important. And then, I don't know. Maybe part of my issue is do we need to establish resolutions and formal committees, or when these topics come up, like negotiations, can we talk as a board about how do we want to handle this? I mean, the whole board sets the parameters for negotiations, right? The financial options. But then maybe we do want to talk about having a board member on the team or whatever. I don't know if tonight is the night we need to decide that, but I think we are being asked to do all these other councils. So it seems like we could at least assign those quickly and get that done, and especially get the required ones done by mandated. And then as we learn about these topics, decide okay, how are we gonna tackle the work associated with it? I feel a little bit like we're putting the cart before the horse before we know anything about these other topics.
Brian? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I think these councils, again, so I did some research and so I sent an Excel document to you guys or Google Sheets. And maybe Superintendent Bowman can share a little bit light on the advisory councils. As I did some research, they are required to be formed, that the administration would have in place and operate and get feedback from the community, but there is no requirement that a board member needs to be on them. And so now, can board members be on them? Absolutely. You guys can go to every single one of them if you want to. But I just want to be mindful and just make sure that you guys are aware, the intent of the school board committees is for us to put our concentrations in areas that we can control and have conversations, do board strategic work within them, and bring recommendations to the broader board for approval. Whereas for the advisory councils are more of getting input from the community, input from other parents, input from teachers, and then eventually that should bubble up back to us anyways, as long as they're aligned to our 3-year strategic plan. And so the question that I have is if we did go to these advisory councils, what are we going to do there? Are we providing guidance? Are we telling them, here's where I want you guys to go? Here's the area that we want you to focus on. How do you not have those metrics? You need to have those metrics for so that the broader organization. But if we're there just to observe, that's no different from getting, the recap notes. And so I just and I agree. I do agree that if you go to a TLAC meeting, if you go to the community education meeting, there is value in going there and learning and hearing how things operate. But these councils are supposed to be run by the administration, but they should be getting guidance from the board, and the guidance should generally come from the board committees. So those are my thoughts. But Superintendent Bowman, I don't know if you can share with me, have we always had board members on councils? Is that what we've always done? I've only been here for 2 years, so I don't know.
I can't say always. I can go back to 2013. Dr. McDonald can maybe go back further. But I'm going to make a broad sweeping assumption. Here, my understanding, and I think Director Baker talked about this a little bit, these were board goals for the purpose of community engagement, divide and conquer efforts. Because you learn a lot by being in those, you interact with a variety of different people within the community. So that's my understanding of it. Again, going back to your seeking a more functional purpose, whether it's, I really think that the learning part is super important. And I know, Brett, you talked about wanting to get that information, and then I think there's a strong desire to act. So I did offer board development as a different format to do that educational process, and I had my staff in the high jumper position ready to go to get through the budget, get through safety and security, you name it, the major lines of operation in the business to help you feel more comfortable with just the fundamental stuff and get to a level of detail that you could also, in those sessions, be able to say, all right, go down this road, go down that road, bring this back. The other thing is aligning that with agenda management. What needs to come into a more formalized presentation? What's the sequencing that you want to be able to weigh in on, and what is compartmentalized, small group versus the whole board? So, I mean, there are different ways to get at this, but without, one thing for sure is there's going to be time investment that's maybe different than in the past. The board is younger. Except Paul. No, just kidding.
Low blow.
I'll take that as a compliment.
It is a compliment. But we're going to have to do something like that. And either way, my only challenge with the process of having subcommittees and seeking the level of knowledge in these compartmentalized groups becomes a round robin process for us as a staff. And I don't believe you're going to be on our schedule. We're going to have to be on your schedule. And that's where I think things get a little bit more difficult in terms of doing that with fidelity, right? A 70% plan vigorously executed is going to get you better results than a perfect plan poorly executed every single time. So, we have to find that balance, and I think that's what everybody's talking about. And you want to be comfortable making decisions that maybe in the past, for those board members who weren't here, didn't feel that comfort because maybe things weren't timed in sequence for you in the proper manner in which you wanted to. So I'm pretty dedicated to that. I've been, again, we have board coordination meeting where we're trying to get that done and do that with fidelity. That's why we're having this discussion. I want to be as open-minded as I can about it, but in the end, we got to get to execution. And in my mind, it's if we can get on some board development methodology, we can get after that collectively a lot faster. And again, I have my staff ready to go. I mean, we just want to lay it out for you and get your guidance and direction, and we can adapt. We're highly adaptable. COVID wore us out, but we're adaptable.
Would you consider tonight kind of board development too? I mean, what we
I would.
received today.
I would absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
So-
I would like to cover maybe 2 or 3 topics for 6 or 7 hours for you guys.
Yeah, we can still go if Emily wants to come back up.
It's early.
I just want to say
Carly.
one. To what you're saying, I just think that is a far more efficient process if we can have the education happening with all of us, because the other thing about subcommittees is what then gets back to the whole board too. So some of it is like public engagement. It was getting board members to be involved in a public event. But in this kind of case, if we are all getting the education, it's not a report, but like how are we going to educate the entire board too? So I like what you're proposing, Superintendent Baumann.
All right, well, for purposes of moving things along, it sounds like there's a general consensus that a policy committee should be established. Maybe we hold off on finance until we get the finance presentation in a couple weeks here and go through that, and then we can maybe hone down exactly what a committee might actually, because like Amber was saying, we might have issues that come up that we say, hey, we need a committee to go look at this specifically and bring back recommendations for the board. Same with teaching. I mean, selfishly, I'd like to be on all of these committees. Especially teaching and learning, but yeah, there might be additional questions or directives that we'd want a smaller group to look at and come back with a recommendation. I don't know if we're ready to move forward with that right now, and I don't know if there's a consensus to move forward with that right now, because I do know that we're going to have some follow-up conversations with Emily McDonald's team. So let me just knock off one. Can I have a motion? I would entertain a motion to
let's do the
approve the
lead.
policy committee formation.
I second.
I
Is that
said
what
I
we're
would
doing?
entertain a motion to.
Oh, my motion. Sorry.
Director Cameron has a motion to approve the formation of the policy committee.
I
Is there a
second.
second? Director Baker seconds. All in favor of forming a policy committee, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. All right, it passes. For purposes of just clarity, the resolutions are what they are. They're just drafts for review. I do think it would be important we have some sort of structure, especially for the policy committee, as far as how something proceeds through the policy committee and comes back to the board. We can discuss this at a later date, obviously, to approve the resolution unless somebody's comfortable with it right now. We could approve it and revise it later too. So,
Can I ask a question here?
yeah.
I'd have to go back and look. I know it's only been a week, but isn't 208 kind of very similar to what a policy committee would function? Potentially, there's language. I know, Brian, you added language in there about the policy committee will do X, Y, and Z. I'm sorry, I don't remember off the top of my head right now, but
Yes,
maybe we need to look at the two documents and make sure they jive.
Yeah, I mean, 208's more so when the policy comes to the board, right? So, because it can be proposed, any policy can be proposed by anyone, right? So we would essentially be saying that the policy committee is going to take a crack at it first, refine it, run it by legal if need be, before we present it back for the board for our 2 readings.
Yeah.
And vote.
Yeah, I think like in this resolution, it says like the cycle in which we'll review, and I just want to make sure that aligns with the 208 revisions. And so I think just having them consistent in language is important. And I can't remember what the 208 version is right now. So.
Yeah, I don't think so I would agree. The resolution should not impact 208, because whatever 208 is, it is. So, all right.
Is going to serve on the policy committee, or are you going to establish that?
Yeah, so I guess, is there any objection to me just appointing people to the policy committee? I know we've had discussions of Brian, myself, and Amber being on the policy committee. All right. We can rotate, yeah. But, yeah, I mean, if that's fine, I think the chair usually would appoint anybody anyway, so. On the councils, I do have names written down for people where I'd recommend that they join. But again, I don't think we need to vote on that necessarily. So, but I can communicate that later. There's no vote. No. Any other thoughts on committees, or that we want to?
Can I ask one question? Kim, do you know where the high school does the sports one? Where do they meet?
I'm not sure they do. It might be an electronic form that gets signed, and then depending on when the issue comes up.
Okay, because I do remember Terry was on that committee, and I know sometimes they met in Owatonna. And since I'm the one that drives down there, like if that is where they're meeting, I would take that on, because I don't expect anybody else to drive 45 minutes south. The
Minnesota State High School League
Minnesota State High School
liaison? Otherwise, I mean, generally speaking, I had Carly for the Wellness Advisory Committee. I think Paul and both Carly wanted to go teaching and learning. Kim, Special Education Advisory Council, Amber, Community Ed, if that was okay still. Brett, I had you Finance Advisory Council. And then Brian, I think I had you with Arenas Board.
Well, I don't play hockey.
Neither do I.
All right, we can discuss that offline though, too, because again, I don't think there needs to be an appointment or a vote, but if Carly wants to do the Arenas Board. Okay.
There you go.
All
Thanks,
right.
Carly.
Otherwise, if there are no other motions to approve any of the other committees, Amber?
I know it says optional, but for some reason I thought, was the wellness advisory we're required to have someone on that, right?
Yeah, I think I
don't know.
said.
Oh, you did say
Carly had
someone?
recommended.
Oh, sorry, I missed
requested
that.
it.
Yay, Carly.
Or maybe you just said you were well suited because it was your job, but if you don't want to be on it, we can open it back up. Okay.
Okay, so
And again, multiple people can attend these, as long as there's no more than 4, or 3, sorry.
I have another question, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
So
Amber.
for the other ones, like gifted and talented, MDCC, if we want to serve on, if we're able to serve on more than one, should we like reach out to you and let you know so we can have as many covered as possible? Or?
Yeah, and then we'll just create a list of who's serving on what board, so then we make sure we don't have more than 3 on any council, rather. Right.
Hey, so all board members can go, but if you've got at least 4 and you start to have dialogue around that, then it's quorum. So if you're the 4th person, you just can't participate. Makes sense?
Yeah.
But I don't want to restrict you from going. You can have 4 board members because you're like a regular stakeholder. You're listening, and that's no different. But because you're not doing active business.
No, if you're.
I would say it violates open meeting law, and I would not put the board in that position. Like, if there are 4 board members present, then someone needs to leave. We do the same thing when we have public engagement. It's only 3 board
Yeah.
members.
The rule is if there's 4 board members, if you have a quorum present and they're receiving information regarding to the business of the district, it's considered an open meeting. So let's just not do that. All right? All right. Back to my other question. Does anybody want to make a motion to establish any other board committee at this time? Or are we okay holding off on that until we get through some more of this board development or presentations from the major sources? If there are none,
Yeah, let's hold off.
I would entertain a motion.
We're doing are the liaisons done? Like, do we need to vote on
Oh,
Kim?
do we need, oh, no, we already did Kim.
Okay.
I don't know, do we have any,
What are we doing about the chamber? Are we doing anyone there? Rotary, Lions Club, City of Lakeville?
so none of these we need to vote on the liaisons, I don't think, but if somebody would like to, arena boards, I think, Carly.
Yep.
Minnesota State High School League, Kim may have volunteered for that if it's in Owatonna. And the 917 is Kim.
Okay.
So I plan on participating in a number of the chamber events, so.
Okay.
If there are additional interests, people can reach out to you, or
Yeah.
we should just make sure that we have one person on each.
I do
right?
have like a spreadsheet. I think
Yeah.
if we even just have that in the shared drive, or we have it posted who's generally going to be participating.
Okay.
So we don't get too many.
I think I'll join you on the chamber one. I think there's with the Lakeville Works, and there seems to be a lot of good things that the chamber is doing, and I think we need to make sure that there's good communication that's going back and forth. I know there's some mentorships and leadership things that they want to do, but for career readiness and college readiness, they do a good job, and I think the more that we can integrate them,
Yeah.
so that would be ideal. Not saying that you guys can't participate in any chamber, but I think having at least 1 or 2 designated to them for further growth would be ideal.
They're a great resource. Yeah, I've been really impressed. And I would just expect anybody who's going to these councils, it will be beneficial for us to hear how things are going, what your thoughts are. If we need more information, then obviously we can do spin-offs or address it in a board meeting. So,
Can I ask a quick question, Matt?
Yeah.
So do I have it right that for like Chamber, Rotary, Lions, if as board members, I mean, I hear what you're saying, Brian, and I agree, but if we want to be members of those, we can all be members if we wanted. There's
Yeah.
that's not a quorum issue.
yeah, so
Right,
you are a member of the chambers, just by being on the board.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
but
okay.
I mean, that would be something where you wouldn't be
Yeah.
at issue.
And to what extent do we work with like Elko or Burnsville? Like Burnsville has equivalents of all these, right? So, and I get that we're primarily Lakeville, but our district serves, however many cities. That's maybe a different conversation.
That's a
but
great question.
we need more things to go to. No, just kidding.
Yeah, let's add another council or 2. All right, Brian.
And then do we have representation for folks going to the Rotary and the Lions Club? Is that something that we want to consider? I'm not a member of any of them, and I don't know if we've historically in the past have sent board members to those functions.
Member of Rotary.
Okay.
I think it'd be great to actually have more board activities around some of the Lions Club events. They do a really cool volunteer. We've done that in the past, volunteer activities. But I mean, I think we could rotate every once in a while who's maybe showing up to a Rotary meeting. I'm sure they would welcome us just as
even if somebody, I don't know if any of you are on their email blast right now, but if you could share when events are coming up, just so we know what's going on, that'd be great.
Yeah, I don't think I've received any email invites or inquiries or information from the Rotary or Lions Club to my school district.
Yeah.
I get like 9 of them from the chamber, from Krista, but she's fantastic, so she's watching. But it'd be good if we, if there's an opportunity for us to be more engaged in those two, I think, because I've heard the Lions Club does quite a bit, the Rotary does a lot of success and calls out our students, high school students, on a monthly basis, so there's some good things over there as well. I don't know.
Anything else?
I'm sorry. I have another question. Okay, sorry, Paul, bear with me. So for the advisories, or the councils rather, like, am I understanding you have names for all of them, or are we just the names we mentioned tonight? Like, do we have anyone on the early childhood advisory? That seems like a key one, a big area of growth for our district.
Usually who's on, sorry. Usually whoever is on community ed also goes to the early childhood
Okay.
advisory council because they're connected.
Okay, yeah, okay, sounds good.
You just
I'll just
talked
see it.
yourself into another council, it sounds like.
Yeah, okay.
No, and again, I mean, we can split these up and multiple people going. So, again, I don't think I can say you have to go to this one or that one, but obviously, participation is encouraged. So, all right.
Let's try to fill out your spreadsheet, or the spreadsheet.
Okay. If there is nothing further, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All right, it is passed.